death writes the code to life.
Yeah.
And we today are thanatoneurotic. We're terrified of death, right? But if you can go from thanatoneurotic to thanatoerotic, you embrace God, sex, and death.
Jamie, tell me about the sex research.
Dr. Nicole Prousey's, she's been researching orgasm as prescription, specifically for women, and just the ideas of can it cure anxiety, help alleviate insomnia, physical pain, all of these things.
Why will fucking better save the planet? I'm Layla Martin. I'm your host of This Tantric Life. This podcast is for you to learn about and be able to use the incredibly powerful system of Tantra in your life. I have been teaching and studying classical and neo-Tantra for over 20 years. And when you apply that to sex, love, and relationships, as I love to do, you end up having conscious relationships, the deepest, most epic and magical sex, and the kind of intimacy that you get to be grateful for on your deathbed. And I want you to have your own magical journey in your own way that takes you from wherever you are now to the most outrageous and true and beautiful expression of sex, love, and relationships that is available to you. Hi, and welcome to This Tantric Life. I'm so excited, like truly excited for this interview with Jamie Wheal. He is the author of Stealing Fire and Recapture the Rapture. He is also the creator of the Flow Genome Project, which is a leadership training organization. I really wanted to have him here today because the people that I respect the most intellectually in the world who are out there doing like wild, wonderful things deeply respect him. They're always talking about his level of genius, his insight, the way that he is really pushing forward so much around the thought and practice of flow states, sexuality, breath work, and just a deeper understanding of how it is that humanity can get back to its roots and its truth and its empowerment again. He's also unique in my early podcast guests in that I have neither given him drugs, taken drugs from him, or slept with him. So we have no historical baggage to speak of, which is actually kind of exciting as we launch this conversation.
There you go, blank canvas.
Blank canvas. All right. Jamie, so one of the things that I loved when I was reading your book, Recapture the Rapture, is that you deeply believe that one of the things that will save humanity, the planet, is us fucking better, breathing better, taking like a small amount of psychedelics, but not too many, and reclaiming our sovereign spiritual truth, which I believe all those things too. So I'm so excited just to be able to talk to you about that because you're such an innovative thinker, being able to give people such a rational understanding of why they should engage in these practices that return them to such an epic truth and ecstasy and power within them. And those practices have been banned in our society for a really long time. And I feel like you're building this bridge for people to understand why they're so important, why they're so fundamentally essential for the return of our human magic again. So I'd love to hear from you just to kick it off, like, why will fucking better save the planet?
As a tagline. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I came to this reluctantly and backwards. Yeah. So for you, right, you've put your stake in the ground around Tantra and that culture and that community. For me, it was much more just taking a clear-eyed look at the evidence and the research of how do we heal and grow, how do we mend and integrate trauma, and how do we prompt and integrate, like precipitate and integrate healthy and productive peak states.
Yeah. And
the more I looked into the research, and my background was in flow states and sort of extreme leadership. So everything from the athletes of Red Bull to advising SEAL Team 6 and the US Naval War College, and sort of how do people do things in really intense, high consequence situations and conditions. And the more I kept studying the research and the findings, it was like, oh, if you really pursue, human optimization to its logical conclusion, and you don't flinch or are squeamish, right? You end up in one of two places. You end up in sort of super sexy biohacking or really nerdy kink. And I was just like, oh my God, really?
And they both go together. It doesn't have to go to the other.
Yeah. And you're like, holy shit, like this is the human physiological nervous system. We are prefrontal cortexes connected to spinal columns, connected to opposable thumbs and erogenous zones. That's us.
Yeah.
Right. And if you just go where the nerve endings dictate and suggest, you end up realizing that our entire bedrock, ecstatic neural circuitry is maps one-to-one with our sexual arousal network. And John Lilly, the sort of famous and infamous researcher, the inventor of float tanks, the pioneer who, LSD with dolphins, all of that guy. Right?
Yeah. He like jerked off the dolphins with like government money, right? While they were high.
Technically, I think he had a nurse do that. They kept the whole gender alignment thing square, But yes, I think there was a...
You wouldn't want to have a gay dolphin experience on government money. It has to be like a heterosexual dolphin experience.
No gay tripping dolphins. That would be a bridge too far.
The line. Yeah. We definitely won't fund sexuality research in this company, but we will let the dolphin get jacked off.
Yeah. And apparently he was happier for it. But that was his original finding with not dolphins but with rhesus monkeys. Was he's like, in a primate nervous system, and this was when he was pioneering these really early electrode stimulations through steel sleeves in the skulls, kind of the stuff that's a little creepy and doesn't pass animal rights and IRBs these days. But back then he was like, oh my goodness. Fundamentally a male monkey with a chance to be stimulated to orgasm will do that, 14 hours a day, pass out, sleep, wake up, and self-stimulate all over again.
Yeah.
But what he realized, it was sort of, scandalous, titillating, but it was like, oh, of course it makes sense. Look, evolution has to get us to reproduce.
Yeah.
And for hundreds of thousands of years, and arguably, hundreds of millions of years for the rest of the, vertebrates and mammals even, we had to figure it out with zero instruction manual, which meant that evolution through the kitchen sink, right, at incenting us through our neurochemistry, through our hormones, through interactions, to figure out how to put our bits together to make more of us, or none of us would be here.
Yeah.
So you're like, that's pretty powerful. Mm-hmm. And then you start looking at that and you're like, okay, if that's our hardwiring and all other peak states, all other ecstatic states, all of these things sort of stem from that foundation, you're like, all right, that's data point 1. Data point 2, let's take a look at human sexuality. And you're like, oh man, it's just a misery Olympics. Like everything from Helen and the face that launched 1,000 ships in the War of Troy and all that carnage and destruction, to all of our own lives, to infidelities, to jealousies, to abortions, to miscarriages, to sexual violence, to childhood abuse, to you name it. And you're like, oh my God, how much of sadness and suffering all the way to war and conflict in the world at its root has a sexual impetus or driver? Mm-hmm. And you're like, a whole lot, a whole lot. I mean, even that stat that, there's genetic analysis that shows that 8% of Asian men carry Genghis Khan's DNA.
Totally.
Which is just war and rape.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, this is gut churning. And so you're like, wait, if so much of our suffering is based on this fundamental, deep structure of our evolutionary impulses that we're encoded to on a biological level, and it sort of feels like biology is destiny, but destiny is a whole lot of heartache and heartbreak and trauma. That doesn't feel like it's super tenable. So what if understanding what those really deep drivers are can then liberate us to snip the puppet strings of evolution, right, and learn to stand up and dance for ourselves. And along the way, oh, by the way, that stuff that's so super potent, super powerful, so strongly incentive, but often leading to tragedy, can actually be what we can hotwire evolution, right? Reclaim our agency, and then repurpose all of those things towards healing, integration, connection, and mystery. And then that's what, a lot of the Kinsey Institute researchers and a lot of the other contemporary science, which is super cool, right, is now coming in to validate and explain there are actually ways to do that. That's not just a thought experiment. And in fact, given the state of the world, given the fact that, we have 8 billion humans on an increasingly sketchy planet with the potential for accelerating heartache, heartbreak, stress, trauma, existential dread, fill in the blanks, how do we get that kind of healing to as many people around the world as possible? And you're like, okay, well, it needs to be cheap or free, right? It needs to be hard to suppress, and it needs to be simple and self-rewarding to do, right? And so that's where you kind of get to like, like you can do, oh my gosh, look, there's transcranial magnetic stimulation. That's neat, but it requires a $10 million machine, you know, and it's $500 a pop or $5,000, you know, complex, even psychedelic therapies, right? You have to sign up for a study. You have to wait. Do you get co-pays or not? You know, all of these kind of things. You're like, well, wait, breathing, we all have to do. And that too, if we fuck that one up, we die. So it's got really strong incentives as to just our respiratory drives and its impact on our consciousness based on the gas blends in our bloodstream and brain. And you got sexuality, right? And then you've also got some versions of embodiment, like what's happening in our vagus nerve, what's happening in our endocannabinoid system, what's happening in these things. And you realize, you know, Archimedes, or not even, it is Archimedes, give me a lever long enough, right? And a fulcrum upon which to place it, and I can move the world. So the longest lever for us to figure out scalable healing, inspiration, and connection for all of humanity is the stuff that's closest to our root evolutionary drivers: sexuality, respiration, and embodiment. So let's start there. And so that's what I mean about kind of coming into this ass backwards. Right? I mean, I'm anything but a tantra teacher, anything but a sexologist. It was coming at it from the sort of anthropological side and the performance neuroscience side, and just realizing it sure seems like there's a there. And then I was like, why on earth am I going to like risk my career writing about this? Because my wife was like, don't tell anyone. Like, you're crazy. Just shut up. He said, keep this to yourself. And I'm like, okay. And I did. I would for like 3 months. And then 6 months later, I'm like, I think I actually have to take a crack at this, because we need the open source toolkit. Yeah. And everybody needs it. Yeah. And we have to figure out ways to get, like, if the hour wasn't so late and the stakes weren't so high, I would have happily stuck to my knitting and never said a word. Yeah. But given that it feels like this is kind of the calm before a whole bunch of storms. Yeah. I was like, I think at least this sort of, these Lego blocks need to be out in the world, and what people build with them after they've, you know, learned about them is on all of us. But I felt some sort of ethical commitment to at least take a crack at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, because it is brave still, strangely, to talk about these things. And it's interesting in Recapture the Rapture, you know, you talk about the anarchist cookbook being like the original manual of like being able to like blow shit up and like start the revolution. And like, I read that when I was a teenager and I was like, yeah, you know, and would run around in Oakland dressed in all black being an anarchist. And then at a certain point I was like, wait, I was like the world we're creating is a function of the consciousness inside of us, like that it's an expression of our internal consciousness. And so if we manage somehow to, I don't know, overthrow the Bush administration with all this anger and rage inside of us, all we're going to create is a new world order of anger and rage. So if I really want to see a different planet, what would shift consciousness the fastest? And I came to sexuality in two ways. One was actually very thoughtful. I was at Stanford University and I was like, that seems like the superhighway to people's transformation. That seems where there's the most conscious misinformation and social repression, and also the most access to growth and revelation and power for people. And also because I was sexually abused by my father, I had this sense of like what it felt like to have sexual sovereignty and wholeness like ripped from me. And I had the kind of righteous indignation that I think sometimes only teenagers can have when they're fresh to the world, where I was like, why the fuck is there not a sexual healing center on every street corner of every city? Like, what are we spending our money on if not the restoration of our own wholeness and healing, especially in these areas? And so at Stanford, I actually worked on high school sex education, because I was like, I want to put the revolution back in the hands of like the kids and the teenagers and like teach them what sex really is. And eventually I just gave up in academia back then. And I was like, fuck it, I'm going to run off to the jungle. I literally bought a one-way ticket to Thailand. And I was like, I'm going to go find out what like sex really is. And what was so fascinating for me in reading your book is there's this incredible science that you talk about in there where, you know, people doing sexual practices are showing better results, you know, than people taking psilocybin at Johns Hopkins University, that there's 6% more people are having, if I'm quoting this correctly, mystical experiences from having a clitoral orgasm than even from taking magic mushrooms, right? Psilocybin. And I see this every day, right? Because as soon as I started working on tantric sexuality, on sacred sexuality, I was like, whoa, like I started this so people could have these like expanded states of orgasm and bliss and beauty. And because I knew what had been taken from me in my experiences, in my journey of restoring that, I was like, I want everyone to know how to do this, whether they've been abused or not. And then in literally, you know, tens of thousands of paying clients and millions of people that have been impacted with my work, I was like, holy shit, like the results people get from doing this work. And it's not just because of me, anyone doing this work, right? Anyone holding it with a fair degree of integrity and safety and training would be able to support people to get these results. And I was like, if you could make this a pharmaceutical pill, it would be a multi-billion-dollar pill, right? The same with breath work. Like if you just take a pill that gave you what breath work does, it would be multi-billion-dollar industry. And even for me, it's practically illegal, right? Like I can't run ads about it on Meta. Like I can't even talk about it that publicly, right? Because it's like, oh, if you put a stone up your vagina, all of a sudden, like, fuck, we still can't talk about it, right? Like even cock being sacred, like it's still such a huge leap for people to be able to talk about the power of sex and what sex can really do for us. And the transformation that's available to people, like I see it day in and day out. And I love, and this was so beautiful in your book. And I literally cried when it's still going to bring tears to my eyes, like reading those sections, because it's going to help people to actually see what sex actually is and like what it can really do and how it really is a portal to mystical states of consciousness and how it does restore our nervous systems to this. To me, it's like the base of your nervous system, your fourth brain, maybe even your first brain. And when you're all repressed and shut down, like what are you doing to the whole foundation of your nervous system? When it's activated and alive and pumping, it's like your whole system starts to integrate in this way that I'm sure there's science behind it somewhere, or there will be soon. It's like your vagus nerve starts coming back into its power, and what that can do for your body, your soul, your spirituality, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So good microdose. So anyways, we're now talking about mood because Jamie's going to tell us all about the science that he's citing in his book. And first, we're going to take some of the sexy supplements. So I'm going to take Sex Magic and Ecstasy because that's how I roll. And Jamie wanted to take Play and Ecstasy. So,
well, keeping in mind that I think that Ecstasy was represented as an upbeat energizer.
Yeah.
That's what I'm taking.
Clean energy with a body high.
There we go.
Who doesn't want to do that? All right. Thank you for playing along with me.
Sure thing.
All right. So these are legal sacraments, which I love. I can't wait to talk to you about all the drugs because I loved your section in Recapturing the Rapture on that. Yeah. I also love that I literally carved out time to read that book because I read that book while I did 3 ayahuasca ceremonies in Costa Rica, was in like a basic, was in a full like anxious spiral because my partner was doing a double plant diet and I couldn't talk to him for 10 days. Then my dog got bit by a rattlesnake and I'm leaving for Egypt tonight. And I was like, Jamie Wheal asked me to read his book. I'm not going to fucking leave it, like let him down.
Awesome.
So there's your water.
Thank you.
Yay. Funny, I don't think I've ever switched it up. I think I've just had Sex Magic and Ecstasy on every podcast.
So yours is loose powder.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can actually, all of the capsules come in powder form too, but they kind of mix better into other drinks. Sex Magic's one of the only ones that mixes really well into anything, including water. Yeah. By the way, I can't wait to hear about your Sex Magic experiences. When you were like, I learned this from 7 years of Sex Magic with my wife. I was like, oh, Like, I've been waiting for a man to say that like sentence for so long. I love that you just like found your way into that rabbit hole. I want to share with you all about Play. So these are our sexy supplements from our brand new company, Mood. And these are custom formulations designed to get you results in your nervous system from daily use. So you take Play every single day. And what it is designed to do, we worked with a team of all female scientists, is to get you out of your head and into the pleasure of your body. So if you know the feeling of like working all day long, I know this feeling, getting off and being like, Layla, do yoga. Layla, make out with your partner. Layla, like, do something, go be in nature. And as I'm just like scrolling on Instagram, one of the things that was so helpful that I learned was that it can take up to 2 hours to shift from sympathetic state, go, into a deep parasympathetic relaxation where you would actually like want to make out with someone. So this formulation is designed to help you make that switch. It does it by giving your body a natural high and a feeling of deep pleasure. It uses things like cacao flavonoids, sacred lotus, mucuna pruriens, which helps support your dopaminergic system, which increases your desire to do things, to engage with the world. And it even has this amazing plant called kana, which is a heart opener. So when you feel good in your body, rushes of pleasure, when you feel a heart opening, you want to connect, you want to be more intimate. So as you take this over time, it's going to help you want more sex. It's going to help you be more playful in your life. It's going to help you do more awesome things. I personally love taking this formula before the gym. I love taking it before yoga, and I absolutely love taking it before making love. You can combine it with Sex Magic, our other incredible product. You can find out more over at shopmood.com. We've got a special discount code for you as a listener of this podcast. It is This Tantric Life 15. This Tantric Life 15. You pop it in at checkout in the discount code section. It'll give you 15% off your first order. So you can head over to shopmood.com, get yourself some Play, and it comes in both supplements, so just capsules you can pop every day, and this beautiful velvet chocolatey flavor that I like to mix into almond milk and have in the afternoon as a kind of lovely, luscious pick-me-up.
I did write an essay back in the day under a pseudonym, but it was called Lizard Brain Fuck Monkeys in the Path to Enlightenment, which was a critique and a contrast of polyamory and the low level polyamory versus higher ogamy.
Yeah.
And the idea that like we're all adults. So which relational format, we're all consenting adults. So like what relational format we choose, go for it.
Yeah.
But are you or aren't you getting through the garden gate?
Yeah.
And what are you seeing and noticing? And what are the pitfalls and potentials of each path?
What's higher ogamy?
Like Hyros Gamos, like the sacred union.
Yeah.
So just play on words and then just saying higher ogamy. So like monogamy, polyamory, serial monogamy, celibacy, those are all psychosexual techniques or compatibilities.
Yeah.
And most conversation gets fixated on which format is better. And it's like, pick one.
Yeah.
They all have opportunities and liabilities. But the real question is how into the sacred realms and what are we doing with those things?
Yeah. And do you believe you can be in sacred union outside of monogamy, or do you feel like it belongs squarely in monogamy?
Oh no, I don't have a moral judgment on it, but I would say it's predominantly a bandwidth and complexity question.
Totally.
So it's like if you haven't figured out how to juggle tennis balls, right, aka with a single dedicated partner, it probably doesn't make sense to start on a unicycle with flaming chainsaws.
No, 100%.
You'll lose some digits. So, and I feel like there's, in the same way that there is conventional monogamy, and the potential, of, bed death, resentment, loss of spark and passion, sameness, right? There's also conventional polyamory, which is basically just spiritually bypassed horn dog swinging by a contemporary rebrand. And then there's post-conventional monogamy, right, which has the potential to be absolutely transformative, and you're meeting the sacred masculine and feminine through the two humans, right, and that becomes limitless and infinite. And then there's also the potential of post-conventional polyamory. It's just that 99% of the people in the airplay is actually this level, conventional polyamory, espousing post-conventional polyamory. And most of the critiques of monogamy, right, are looking backwards at bed death conventional monogamy without ever exploring sacred monogamy. So my sense is that ultimately the highest expression would be, it is all love, we are all love, and love each other freely. Stranger in a strange land. Right? Like Church of All Worlds, like that, without a doubt. Yes. I just don't know. I mean, I know I have my hands full walking the householder's path, loving the one I'm with,
Yeah.
and loving our kids.
Yeah.
And I just literally don't fit, and I think I said this to our mutual friend, Kyle Kingsbury, right? It was sort of like, if you're picking out your relational formats, it's like you can have a chosen life partner, children, a vocation, like a dharmic obligation, not just a place I get paid, right?
Yeah.
A calling I have to do, or, if I haven't on my deathbed, I failed.
Yeah.
Right. And polyamory.
Yeah.
Pick 3.
Yeah.
Right. So you can have a life partner, no kids,
Yeah.
a calling, and additional lovers. Awesome. You can have a life partner, kids, and a calling, and your dance card's probably full, right? Or any of the other mix and matches,
Yeah.
or no life partner, and I'm just into relationships and lovers, kids from a prior engagement, presumably, and a calling, right? So you can kind of mix and match on those. I haven't seen anyone nail all 4 simultaneously. I've seen a tiny handful of folks figure out 3 of the 4.
Yeah.
And pull it off.
Yeah.
That's it.
I kind of see it in terms of spiritual evolution in a way that, like, look, if you want to spiritually evolve, the vast majority of people, the vast majority of the time, have to go on retreat. Like, you're not just going to be able to be in your everyday reality and have the depth of realization, understanding, and even like dedication to yourself and the path unless you're on a meditation retreat. You're sitting in an ayahuasca ceremony with like traditional kind of commitments. You're doing a deep yoga retreat, right? You're meditating in a cave. Like, you have to be pushed to face those hard truths and the reality inside of you. To get to sacred union, in my experience, requires that level of honesty, transparency, depth, and in many ways overcoming the conditioning of the shitty monogamy, right? Like what it is to be so honest with each other, so intimate with each other, that sexually expressed, right? And so it's very much like a spiritual path, but with 2 rather than 1. So it's even more complex than doing it on your own. And so if you want to go to that depth, it's like you need your own version of a spiritual retreat. And to me, that's what monogamy can be. It pushes you to look, it pushes you to do the work, it pushes you to have no escape. And that's what devotion does too, like being devoted to your partner, even though spiritually we can be like, and I have this side to me too. You're like, who the fuck knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Like, I could say I'm going to be with you forever. And like, we're living what's true every single moment. And yet if I devote myself to this container, it's like if I devote myself to my meditation practice, like what becomes available. So to me, it's like that's the original container of monogamy. And just like when you spend enough time in a meditation retreat, at some point your spirituality becomes more flexible. And then you get to take everything you've learned into like a strip club or like making money or having a bunch of orgasms or taking drugs, right? It's like you get gifted. You don't have to do that, but you can take the realizations and you can play with them at a far greater bandwidth. To me, sacred polyamory, or the higher order transcendental polyamory that you're talking about, would be an expression of that. Like, we mastered the monogamy sacred union, and now together we want to play a little bit more in the danger zone so that we can grow, so that we can discover. But still, just like when you then go make money, take drugs, you're always coming back to your spirituality. Like, that's the core of it. To me, it's like, even if you engage in that transcendental polyamory, you're continuously coming back to the core of intimacy, either with your partner, or if you go completely just like love with everyone, total freedom, total in the moment, there's this true deep center of intimacy and love and truth that's like your anchor point. And that doesn't come easy. It's like saying like the highest point of life is enlightenment, but like, of course, and so few people are living that, expressing that, and trying to be enlightened would be a spiritual bypass. So trying to be polyamorous, because that could be the highest expression of truth. To me, it's like a relational bypass, because most people right now that I see are unwilling or don't know the path to just get to sacred union in the container of monogamy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's plenty there, right? The question is, in most, and this is generalizing, and this is speaking about as it's actually showing up, and let's just be really specific, like upper middle class, tech nomadic, Conchi, transformational, psychedelic, festy, circuit, burner,
Yeah.
global diaspora culture, that crew.
Yeah.
It almost feels like there's two different dynamics, right? Like if you're in polyamorous community, right?
Yeah.
And people are loving each other, then the goal is, can we all get back onto the same page in the present moment? So like we have pairings, there's new relationship energy, there's managing and processing of jealousy, and all of the things that arise as we try this stuff that doesn't have a lot of cultural signposts or guidelines, right? And the goal is to get back to the present. Are we all together and aligned? Is everybody good?
Yeah.
Right. And that's a sort of horizontal move. We kind of get scattered and we're trying to talk and process and communicate our way back to now. And then in a singular relationship with just a dyad, you're like, now the question is we are who we are. There's no scattering. How deep can we go?
Yeah.
And so the idea here is can we metabolize and process our karma to get back to 0, on the grid? In a dyadic relationship, you can actually, can we excavate down to our dharma? And what are we actually, who are we at root or essence? And it's not that they're incompatible. It's just that you can spend an awful lot of time oscillating at this level in a karma factory on overdrive and mistake that for personal growth or spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
And there can be bits and pieces in there for sure, but it's noisy.
Yeah.
Super noisy.
Yeah.
Versus, can we just get to the still point? I always think of it as like almost like a cenote down in Tulum or something, right? Like if you just take a deep breath and descend down the center of it and you don't knock the sides, right? You can get down in crystal clear water to the bottom, and there underneath the sand is like the pearl of great price.
Yeah.
And if you're really gentle, you can pry it up and you're like, oh my gosh, this. But if you're slamming and banging, down all the way, then it's just a whiteout. You can't see shit. And not only will you never find the pearl of great price, but you might even have trouble getting back to the surface. So everything that you were just describing, the full state seeking, basically you're sort of describing our contemporary secular, semi-sacred left-hand path, right? It's like everybody's chasing states, and the most rapid path to waking up, or whatever we would say, but also, the old Zen saying of the left-hand path or Tantra is the fastest route to enlightenment with the lowest success rate, right? And so take this culture that we're sort of loosely speaking of, and you can sort of see that it's like, oh, everybody starts out seeking the grail. Yeah. Right? The loving cup. Right. Yeah. What is Christ consciousness? What is the sacred union of Mary and Jesus? Whatever. Right. Like that. The Arthurian legend of Grail lore. You go to the Grail castle, and if you're pure enough of heart on your quest, you even get in the front door. Yeah. But the dirty little secret, I think, is that the Grail castle and the Hotel California share an inside wall. And if you're not careful, and if you lose the intention, and if you lose the purity of heart, the very same techniques or tricks or tips or hacks or practices or substances or relationships or states that were bringing you closer to heaven can actually leave you trapped in hell. Yeah. And that one, I don't think there's a big enough warning label on, because then we just become lizard brain fuck monkeys. We're just pressing all the buttons and seeking all the sensations, and we've lost the plot of in service of what.
Right. Well, I would say, first of all, I love your mind. Like, I would consensually lick one of your neural circuits. It's so good in there. But I would say, to me, the right-hand path is when you are still seeking, when you do believe that heaven is somewhere else and then you have to get there. And when you do believe that the world has something for you, that if you could just do it that way or experience this or have this. And so I think what is lacking maybe for a lot of people is the self-honesty to say I ain't no lefty. I am doing these things because I still seek something from experience. I still seek something from a threesome or a hot model or a billionaire or my career or my children or my partner, right? That is to say oh, well, everything's God, or, we can be hedonistic, but to actually then be pursuing and engaging with the reality as though you have somewhere to go. To me, that is right hand justifying hedonism with left hand. But a true lefty, in my opinion, as someone who identifies as a lefty, would be like, heaven has always been right here, as is hell. And there is nothing to get from this reality. And the reason that I can do absolutely anything is because I don't have a story about it. And that, to me, is true left hand. Can you get knocked easily because you can start justifying, or you have very hidden doors of egoic illusion and hunger trying to feed like a hidden hungry ghost inside of you? Absolutely. And to me, so that is the lefty path, is to be so honest with yourself about your own egoic delusions of when you start knocking over into Hotel California and you're doing what you're doing because you think there's ever somewhere to get. And a real lefty is just here doing it forever.
I think you're fusing the traveler and the path.
Yeah.
So you're describing someone who is still seeking,
Yeah.
and then conflating that with the right hand path, and then someone who is truly free. Yes, the roomy out there is a field beyond right and wrong business, right?
Yeah.
And then conflating that with the left hand path, which totally works as a thought experiment.
Yeah.
If I would add to that, or maybe keep riffing with you on it.
Yeah.
Just for listeners, right? The orthodox path literally means like orthodontist. Orthodent is straight teeth.
Yeah.
Like orthodox is straight teaching.
Yeah.
Right. So the right hand path is one that says, "Thou shalt" and "Thou shalt not." And
Yes.
It tends to be the realm of morals. They are exclusive, they are binary, and they're generally rigid and unflexible. They're not context dependent.
Yeah.
Like them's the rules.
Totally.
Right?
Because there's a right way and a wrong way to do reality.
And if you don't want to slip, don't go where it's slippery.
Yes.
Stick over here.
Yes.
And so those kind of moral codes are generally great for mobilizing and aligning the masses,
Yeah.
because they're based on lowest common denominator fuck ups.
Yeah.
Right. And then the left hand path says the opposite. It says all is permitted. Right. And it's no longer moral codes of universal, exclusive, consistent. Right. It's ethics, which is, it's no longer the act, it's your relationship to the act. Right. So it's only wrong to eat people if you're not a cannibal. Right. And right, that could be a sacred act of communion, right? Which is typically often how it was versus, our kind of colonial scare stuff. And also, you could kill your mother and you could be Norman Bates in Psycho. Right. Or it could be the most compassionate, tear-strewn euthanasia.
Yeah.
And, right. And you're like, okay, well, which is it? Right.
Yeah.
And so, and that's, and that's the Tibetan traditions in Dzogchen and everything. Go and meditate on the corpses in graveyards, like violate all the norms and sit with it.
Yeah.
Until you can be in that field beyond right and wrong. Now, once you get there, and more people are getting there, especially in this postmodern, post-conventional, state-seeking heavy spaces, I think, which is, the McKenna brothers called it like the screaming abyss, right? Yeah. Once you've peered over the screaming abyss, then there's almost, I think, the best I can tell, only two outcomes, right? You either end up a Sith Lord, because you're like, nothing is true, all is permitted. I'm just going to fuck with shit because I can. This is the Joker, right? Like that Heath Ledger Joker, where he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I don't know. A plan? I don't have a plan. I'm just a dog chasing cars, man. Right? I just like to see shit burn. Just an agent of chaos, or like Brando in Apocalypse Now, like Kurtz up the river. Right? You've succumbed to the sort of Nietzschean will to power.
Yeah.
Because you're like, all those petty morals of mere mortals, I've realized are false. And in my liberation, I just have a will to power. I just fuck shit up.
Totally.
Now I know I can, and I am beholden to none of those superstitious customs.
And people can be horrified by this idea because they're like, oh, no, like if you were to know the truth, you must be a good person. And it's like, well, no, then we'd be kind of blackmailed by universal consciousness, where it's like, if you know the truth, you're going to automatically be a good person.
Yeah.
You know the truth, and you still have free will.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Sidney Gottlieb, everyone who's like, yay, psychedelics are going to save the world, and we're all going to open up to like Gaia consciousness and much nicer to each other. And you're like, yeah, Sidney Gottlieb was the founder of MK Ultra.
Totally.
And did like 230 acid trips, and also dosed Whitey Bulger, the mafia boss, and like they did not come round. They were non-specific amplifiers of the path they were on. But the alternate option, once you see that, right, staring over the screaming abyss and choosing to come back, is the sort of the bodhisattva vow. You come back as a saint. You're like, okay, I have seen that, nothing is true and everything's permitted, the Hashashin, the old man in the mountains realization. And at the same time, I choose love. I choose light.
Yeah.
I choose humanity. I choose service. And I'm totally aware that is ultimately an arbitrary choice.
Yeah.
It wasn't required. It is an optional thing, which, you know, is arguably where you kind of East meets West. You know, that is arguably the atom bomb energy pulse of the story of the Nazarene, right? On the cross, he has to actually choose. He has to choose the cup. He's like, I really don't want it. If it has to be mine, I'll take it. Hey, can I hang with my buddies? Can you at least stay awake? None of it works, right? Everybody abandons him. Everybody loses him. And then even to the, you know, to the end, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Are you even there, Father? Nope. Sorry, son. You got to just suck this up and go solo. Yeah. Humiliated, abandoned, and alone. And the people that praised you a week ago on Palm Sunday are now pelting you with shit and mocking you. And then he still says, forgive them for they know not what they do. Yeah. And like that, and it has to get to like that level. Yeah. Like every single leg of every single stool has to get kicked out. And then he still has that choice of like, okay, I know the score and it sucks to be me and I forgive them anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, as we, for our last rabbit hole on the right and left hand path, because I'm not sure how many people are like, no, really the nuances of the right and left hand path, but I care very deeply.
No, this will be the second to last rabbit hole. We'll have
no, there's going to be so many rabbit holes. To me, when you said like, you feel like I'm conflating the path and the traveler, I feel like the path shows you what the traveler is, right? And so to me, on the right-hand path, there's a belief that the external matters, right? So the reason that I believe in morality and right and wrong, and I want things to look a certain way outside, like I'm going to wear white during prayer, I'm going to chant, I'm going to fast, I'm not going to have sex, is because I believe that the external appearance of reality, like how things are shaped, matters, right? And to me, that's the fundamental belief of that person, is that I can get something by doing this universe right. And so the left-handed path, which is often aligned with goddess worship and taboo practices, as you're talking about, is the consciousness matters. The consciousness is the point, and the external is not. And so there's a kind of courageous bravery in willingly giving up your attachment to how things look on the outside. And so to me, like the true lefty, we tend to think of it as the people who hang out with skulls in the graveyard, which I love, by the way. Like, I'm very drawn to that. Do blood rituals, wild sex rituals, take the intoxicants, sure. But you're not a true lefty if you couldn't equally do that and raise your children and be in meh and like the many shades of gray, or go to a 9-to-5 if it was true. And so like, to me, it's the path of what is true, and this like deep surrender to the truth of consciousness, where you're just as willing to wear white as you are black, to be in a graveyard as in a temple, right? And to fuck wildly with 1,000,000 orgasms, or be celibate, because the consciousness, the truth of it is what matters, not the external. And so I think sometimes people associate the lefties as like being the stone cold weirdos, because we are, but there's the people who are just doing the hedonistic play. To me, if that's not the deepest truth based on their state of consciousness, then it's not lefty, no matter how wild it looks.
Yeah, for sure. I actually had an interesting epiphany. We were guiding in Nepal and Tibet. We were going to ultimately end up climbing Everest, and went to all of these super out of the way tantric monasteries and all these things that the Chinese had not even got to. Like, they were up at 17,000 feet. They were completely undone. And in one of them, there was a stupa with the prayer wheels. And we were telling our students, they were a bunch of college kids, and we were like, okay, you got to be really respectful. Here's the deal. You go around and you spin them anti-clockwise, like let's everybody go and do that. And then our guide kind of whispers to me, he's like, yeah, but the shamans spin them clockwise. Yeah. And I was like, oh, fuck. Okay, so we've got the same prayer wheels, the same sacred intention, and you've got the two different traditions that have made Tibetan Buddhism, right? Yeah. The original Bun shamans, and then the Buddhist lineage coming over from India. And they do it exactly backwards, and they both work.
Yeah.
it's like the old story of King Solomon having the prophetic dream, and he invites the eight wisest men and women to the king's chamber to tell him the interpretations of the dream, and all 8 come true.
Yeah.
So it's kind of what I hear you saying is also true in the distinction between like high magic and chaos magic.
Yeah.
Right? Like high magic is smells and bells, it's rituals and funny incantations, and you got to get it exactly right.
Yeah.
Right. And then chaos magic is like, fuck it. Well, whatever works. Right. and for sure, I'm in favor of, I'm sort of, loosely would align with sort of being like Pythagorean chaos magic.
Yeah.
I think is the sort of the Western lineage that I would most identify with. But to build on what you were saying about left and right hand paths, and the distinction between somebody could be a hedonist, like feeling like they're over here, but they're not really, because they're still fixating on form or promise of external deliverance or relief. Another factor that I notice is people can get pulled into, hey, anything goes. So I'm going to pursue ecstasy, right, as an accelerant versus just rigid adherence. But then often people end up feeding it from their shadows, indulging. That's the lizard brain fuck monkey elements. And then they end up backing off or judging themselves. They're like, oh, I partied too much this weekend, I got to be cold turkey or sober. Or, oh no, sober October, I got to go, I don't trust myself. And you're like, oh wait, so now you've subtly gone from everything is permitted, everything is holy, to a subtle dualism. And you're like, I don't trust myself. This is good or bad. This is pure or not. This is all these things. So you're like, oh, even though I'm over here wearing all the costumes and doing all the things and going to all the parties of the tantrika, I'm actually playing the right-hand path again because I've created that subject-object split of this is permitted or good and this is not. And quite often it's a battle within ourselves. So the potential solution, like, because we're in the postmodern 21st century, we're like, okay, we've seen these movies for centuries, is what is the middle path? Right? And there is a way to practice with the left-hand tools and techniques where if you actually implement an annual hedonic calendar, right? And you actually create boundaries of frequency. So you say, what do I do on a daily basis, right? That is generally my positive uplifting stuff. That's flossing my teeth and doing my yoga and, working out, whatever it might be. Knock yourself out. Then there's my Sabbath practice. What do I do once a week that is actually getting me into state, whatever high level of that I have access to? Once a month, what's a full day, once a season, what's a weekend, and then what's a week once a year? And then can I actually put my ecstatic practices into the right categories? And if you do that, by the way, they fucking all work really well. And you build up momentum versus just erratically doing stuff. And then you have a Lent period. You have a period of abstinence because you have to check yourself to not wreck, right? And so you have to be like, okay, then I'm going to go cold turkey. And I'm going to observe in my psyche and my nervous system, how sticky is that stuff? I said I've got my nicotine gum on lock because Andrew Huberman told me I should, right? Like am I popping it all the time, right? Or am I using it for maximum creativity? I love to have chocolate after dinner, but am I jonesing without it? I do my sacred hape or tobacco or whatever, but actually I'm really just a nicotine addict, right? And am I using sexuality to defrag my nervous system and connect with a love, or am I using it to manage my moods and my stresses in an unconscious way? Check it. And then the question isn't should I or shouldn't I? It's not a subtle version of the right hand, right oughts and shoulds. It's just more often or less often. So you've gone from a moral judgment to a frequency assessment. And then if it's too sticky, you just make it less often. But you're still keeping the flame under the crucible. So you get to do alchemy without the messy boilovers of the pot. And it takes it from often self-judgment, shame, guilt, those kinds of energies, which show up when we overcook over here, right? And much more into just a calibration as an hedonic engineer. You're like, I'm just tuning the frequency and intensity of what I do to keep that little Bunsen burner on a simmer, to burn away everything that is not pure in my selfhood, right? To get to the philosopher's stone.
Well, I think there's also like a really great question, which is like, why do we have so much guilt and shame associated with our hedonic nature? And to me, because of that original Judeo-Christian split where, pagan communities, and to me, most tribal societies, right, they had these contained spaces to lose their fucking minds, to be hedonic, to have, cornucopias of food or sex or magic or whatever it was that they were having to partake in sacraments, right? There were structured spaces in which people allowed themselves in super sacred, connected ways to engage with those parts of life. And once it became taught that that was anti-God, anti-religion, anti-good, to me, in the base of so many people's psyches now, because whether you grew up in a Judeo-Christian religion or not, it impacted the culture of the entire world. There's this split where we believe so deep inside of ourselves existentially that when we're having a really fucking good time, we're being the opposite of the divine. And so I see that in the way that people partake in drugs and partying and sex and all of the, and eating, right? There's always this slight shame or guilt because we forgot that originally those are gifts and they can be used as ways to be more intimate, to be more connected, to know more of yourself, right? The best parties can be as potent as a chanting all night, right? The most incredible plant medicine journeys, or, even just taking LSD at Burning Man can be as transformative as a 10-day fast, right? Like you can party and fuck in such a way that you find more of yourself instead of less of yourself, that it's actually good for you rather than bad for you. But I feel like we forgot that as an art and a practice. And I think at least what I understood from your book is part of that you're trying to rebuild in people is them having this relationship to hedonism that is actually thoughtful and that buttresses the expression of hedonism with responsibility, which is very human, right? Like no pagan or no person in a tribe just like took a bunch of drugs, fucked everyone, had like a buffet, and then never went back to work. No, you got up the next day and like did what you had to do with the cow or whatever. And so there's this need to me in the human psyche, both to work and to earn our keep here on this planet in whatever the way that looks like for us, and to show up and be self-responsible for our own lives, and to touch ecstasy and bliss and mischief and play and not have it feel like it's taking us away from God and truth, but actually bringing us closer. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one whole element of society that's just missing that people need, right? We think of parties and raves of just like people just knocking themselves out and being so bad for you, but you can party in such a way that like you find yourself, and by sunrise you feel amazing no matter what drugs you took. Like that actually is possible. But it takes a level of self-responsibility and self-knowing. To me, that's different. I think people are maybe confusing the true left-hand path, which to me is about devotion and consciousness, right? It's an incredible discipline. And to me, it's a willingness to be in a devotional love affair with every experience of the universe, which means that if you want to be a true lefty, like you better be in love with heartbreak and grief and death and like all of the hardest parts of reality, because that to be a true lefty is to be as equally with those as with any other part of reality. And I think maybe what's getting conflated is this deep need in the human psyche to celebrate and fuck and play and be mischievous and to actually find ourselves again through that. And that without that, there's like a lostness in the human soul. And like, it always pains me when I encounter it. And one of the things I'm super passionate about is using spirituality not to get the fuck out of here, because like, where are you going, right? But to use spirituality to like get more human, be more here, be more in celebration of all that is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think even the relatively briefest of inquiries will you can demonstrate pretty convincingly like, oh shit, okay, consciousness is the substrate of the universe and we are just starlight dressed up as matter. So you're like, okay, if that was our before state and quite possibly our after state, that's table stakes.
Yeah.
That's actually not the miracle. The miracle is we, the existential mayflies of the universe.
Yeah.
Right. With opposable thumbs and prefrontal cortexes to love and fuck and fight and care and grieve and be embodied. Right. For these 8 decades that we are gifted with this holy shit, we're alive moment. And instead of trying to bypass it. Right. And I think that's actually the beauty of any initiatory death rebirth practice. Yeah. Right. Which is the substrate again of most art, philosophy, culture, religion from time immemorial, which is the first time we're born, we didn't have a choice unless you subscribe to a soul contract, blah, blah, blah. But if you're just kind of like on the biological, rational material, it's like, two parents bumped uglies and here we are. Right. And we started out in this wonderful womb and everything was groovy. And then we get spat out in this totally traumatizing event into this cold, harsh, bright, loud world. And no one plays fair. And you're just like, what the fuck? Like nobody like I was promised a rose garden. I was in the womb. Right. And so most of us have some degree of feeling we got a raw deal, feeling that life isn't the way it was supposed to be, and there's injustice and there's pain and there's suffering and people aren't always nice and I don't get it. So we look to get out.
Yeah.
And so we look to bypass it. We soothe with food, we soothe with sex, we soothe with shopping, we soothe with drugs, we soothe with new age spirituality. We're all trying to get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah.
And then no matter how many times you do it, you're like, oh, boom, drop right back here again, and until we finally go, oh, I've now died before I die. I now realize that in fact, I'm not done with this life. And I actually choose with my whole being to say, yes, I am willing to pick back up my yoke. Right. And we know this from stories. We know this from, we know this from Jonah and the whale. Right? Peace out. I don't want to do it. Oh shit. Okay. I got to do it. You know it from Jimmy Stewart in A Wonderful Life. I want to jump off a bridge. No, actually, oh my God, this is I had no idea. This is Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. I hate fucking Kansas and this flat ass dusty farm I'm stuck on. Oh my God, there's no place like home. Right? We see it 1,000 times in all of our myths and stories, but the hero has to have the choice. Yeah. And so we're all firstborns running around trying to get the hell out of here. So, soothing addictions and seeking sensations. And to become twiceborns is, I think, the first time that we actually have the chance to show up fully in presence and then get to conduct the experiment that you're describing.
And I believe that is part of true Tantra and most real mystical traditions or spiritual traditions, which is you actually stop trying to escape this reality and make a really deep, true peace with the fact that like sadness is forever, like your core wound is forever, loneliness is forever, like you stop trying to fight your human condition and be with it. And there's an intimacy to that to me is also like the basis of the most amazing sex and relationships. And it's so hard to make love and to be in the most sacred union of relationships if we can't be with ourselves, right? If we're still telling ourselves the fundamental lie, there's something I could do that will get me out of here. Because as long as you're trying to not be here, you can't fully revel in the most magical gifts that are left everywhere. Like the universe is like one giant fucking Easter egg,
Yeah, there's a book you might have come across. There was a book that Susan Cain wrote a few years ago called Quiet, like being an introvert in an extroverted world. It was like on the Times bestseller list for like 2.5 years. But her new book is called Bittersweet, and it's basically her inquiry of like, why do I love Leonard Cohen songs so much? They wreck me, right? And then in the writing of it, she lost both her father and her brother to COVID, so she actually experienced acute loss.
Wow.
And the whole point of the book, and I love it so much, is, hey, that bittersweetness, that sense of being forever stretched between the agony and the ecstasy is the human condition. That's not an error message. That's not something to fucking take Clonopin for. That's not something to get in touch with your attachment, traumas or your inner dolphin. Like, fuck it. That's us. And it's exquisite. Right there. And she talks even about a Sufi teacher and just, the premise of all of mystical Sufism is the yearning for God. Yeah. But we're here stuck in human form, and it's the yearning. It's even, there's that funny old book, The Tao of Pooh. I don't know if you ever read that back in the day, right? Where like they equate Winnie the Pooh with the tenets of Taoism. And it's the exquisite nature that the moment before the honey is even better than the honey. Yeah. Right? It's that yearning. It's that sense that is who we are. We are between Kairos and Chronos. Like Chronos, our chronological lives, is nothing but suffering. That's Buddha's Noble Truth 101. And then Kairos, the deep now, it's timeless, gorgeous. You just want to swim in it. But in these meat suits of ours, right, the best thing we can possibly hope is to be, and that's the mystical interpretation of the cross, right? To be in Christ consciousness, right? Isn't some evangelical Southern Baptist accepting Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. The mystical interpretation of the cross is to actually be a human whose beating aware heart is at that intersection bearing witness. right? With full agency and choice. And you're like, yeah, that's a fun ass jam. And even like Zorba the Greek, right? Like that Nikos Kazantzakis book, where, you know, he's being asked like, so how are you doing this, Zorba, and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, you know, it's the full catastrophe, right? The fishing boat, the wife, the kids, life, it's the full fucking catastrophe. And to me, that phrase has been so liberating. You know, I talk with friends and I'm like, how's it going? And they're like, oh man, like the sandwich generation, you know, you're raising young kids, you're dealing with ailing or aging parents. You're like, how do we do this? This isn't what I thought in college or whenever. And you're like, yeah, man, it's the full catastrophe. And just permission for us to sit there and laugh, raise a glass, celebrate it, weep, you know, whatever we need to do, and not feel like there's anything wrong with it. And not feel like there's someplace I'd rather be, you know, and to fully accept it. To me, that is one of those beautiful reframes, you know, and it doesn't change the hurt. It doesn't reduce it one lick, you know, but it does give us a bigger container to hold it in.
This is Ecstasy, the legal kind. This is a supplement formula from my sexy supplement company, Mood. So this is formulated with powerful ingredients that are combined to both give you a body high. So ingredients like rhodiola, tribulus, and maca that activate your whole system to be able to feel more pleasure, and ingredients that give you clean energy over the long term. What these do, they're things like PQQ and CoQ10, is they actually train your mitochondria to be more efficient at making energy inside of your body. So what you get is a natural body high. What this is designed to do is to retrain your nervous system to feel more pleasure and more bliss every single day, which helps you also change your idea of yourself to be a more pleasure-filled, blissful person. So I like to take this before I clean. I'm not the best cleaner, so I got to like motivate myself. I like to take it honestly before I walk the dog. I have a Belgian Malinois. He needs to be walked all the time. So like I need help to get literally in the mood to walk my dog. And yes, I love to take it before sex. I love to combine it with our other product, Sex Magic, and it really activates my entire body and my energy system before making love, before doing tantric rituals. This product is absolutely incredible. So it comes in capsule and drink powder form. I don't know why I just felt like taking capsules in front of you. Like maybe if you see me taking the capsules, it'll just be like really clear what you're supposed to do with this. So here we go. You take 3 of these babies. 1, 2, 3. And there's a reason I've been taking this with all my guests here on the podcast, because you literally you feel it. It's designed to be felt. And it's so good. All right, so you can head on over to shopmood.com. We have a special discount code for you. It's this Tantric Life 15. This Tantric Life 15, you pop it in at checkout. It'll give you 15% off your first order. And that is at shopmood.com. So the website is shopmood.com. And here's to your higher bliss and joy. And for all of us using plant consciousness and plant ingredients to live our absolute best lives, to live our sex lives, to get turned on. Wow. Yeah, and I can feel both, both the tragedy of wanting to Klonopin away the gift of the human experience, and how badly I have wanted to Klonopin away my own gift of human experience, that it can be both at the same time. And one of the things I've really thought about is everyone is suffering pretty much. Everyone is in a tremendous amount of fucking pain, and we forget that. And it becomes so clear the moment that people are given the chance to be super real with each other. And even in all this pain that we're in, the everyday miracle of being alive, it's we're literally trying to cope with so much unbelievable goodness, everywhere, all the time, even just the goodness of this human body and this human experience. And it's there's so such an inability sometimes to even know what to do with a gift that big. I feel we can spend our whole lives just trying to cope with the fact that it's so magnificently, awesomely epic, and we'll never, ever, ever know we can't deserve it. But we have some sort of story that we should.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's several things. One is our shared pain is so profoundly humanizing, right? We run camps and workshops sometimes, and we'll do some exercises on shame, right? And you just have everybody write down their deepest shame, but it's all anonymous. And then 8 people in a group just pick writings out of the bowl. Yeah. So you'll hear yours read, but it's not by you, and no one knows whose is what.
Yeah.
Unless somebody's like, what happens if you get your own? You know, you're like, all right, well, now we know. But like you go through that exercise, right? And people burn them or they do whatever they do. And they, you know, they have their spokesperson reverse them. You know, I claim the truth because obviously I only experience shame if I believe there's a higher truth I've violated or I'm out of integrity. So, you know, you do these wonderful verbal turnarounds and you, at the end of it, you're like, Jesus, there is so much trauma, so much grief, so much heartbreak in this room. And oh, by the way, let's be real, we all won the lottery.
Yeah.
We wouldn't get to choose to come to things like this.
100%.
And how are any of us still standing?
Yeah.
Right. And my God, humans, good job. You know, so that sense of like, you know, my, you know, unique and especially important difference, you know, we're like carpetbaggers of catharsis. We go to therapy and we come up with our little understandings of our trauma patterns and, you know, all of this. And then we trot them out to anybody at a moment's notice. You get into a men's group or a women's group, or you're sitting in circles or you're raising, you know, and we hash and rehash that shit. But you realize, oh, this is table stakes.
Yeah.
We've all got some version of this.
Totally.
Therefore, in a math equation, it's the constant on both sides of the equal sign. So you can just cross it out.
Totally.
Now what? You know, and if we're standing, and actually that's a conversation I've had with Gabor Mate, because he's like, you know, I think he's done great things to advance the notion of the ubiquity of trauma. But on the other hand, he's like, well, if trauma is responsible for addiction, and trauma is responsible for depression, and trauma is responsible for ADD, and trauma is responsible for everything that sucks about being a human, then that's now the constant in the equation. So you're like, actually, so then that's no longer an insight. The insight is, how do the people who have also experienced this rise above it? That's now the interesting outlier versus from time to time people get so fucked up by their trauma that these other bad symptoms arise. And I feel like, you know, I'm not sure if our default social sort of software leads us as helpfully as it might to the places you're describing, which is like radical liberation by no holds barred, sensation seeking, sucking the marrow out of life. You know, because we're often conditioned to believe that, you know, our pain is unique and endlessly important and relevant, that by thinking about it, processing it, talking about it, we somehow release it, and then ... subtle to explicit implication depending on who's marketing to you, right? And then you float on clouds and it's unicorns and rainbows from here on out, and you get your hashtag best life and the Airbnb and the Lambo and all the stuff, and you never have to suffer from the human condition again. You know, so that's one thing. I think just truth in advertising, like, hey, best case scenario is this is a walk-on part in the war. This is not a lead role in the cage, right?
No, I mean, I think the best you can hope for is to be alive.
Yeah.
Like actually say, like, look, I showed up in my fucking life.
Yes.
It never stopped being hard. There never stopped being pain. It never stopped being a fucking constant adventure of mystery. But like, at least I showed up for it, right? Because a lot of us, I think, end up just doing this, understandably, and then life passes us by. And I think the other thing that you can hope for is to actually like learn to get a little bit of a kick out of it. You know, if you stop expecting to not have a broken heart or to be in pain or to be in the catastrophe, right? You can have this subtle enjoyment of it. And that's actually the gateway. I mean, you surely know this and probably teach this yourself, but to ecstasy, right? Is the allowance of whatever is in the deepest way, right? It's I see it every single day in the people that I work with. Like when you make anything the portal of your experience, anything can become ecstatic. And so it's not like you walk on bliss and cloud 9 because you somehow like whatever tinkered with the universe and figured out how to bend it to your will all the time. You learned bliss and ecstasy through the full experience of life, which is always going to be the full spectrum. And thank God, because it'd be so fucking boring if you could just, like, we all like dream of the state we wouldn't even want to be in, right? Like I always ask people, and there's some version of this question that I didn't invent, but it's like, you know, if you could just live in a white capsule for the rest of your life and have nothing but MDMA pumped in your like veins and nothing but bliss, and you could just control all of your reality and have everything anything you want. How long would you want to do that, truly?
Yeah.
Or would you want to pop into the universe of eternal mystery where you have no idea what the fuck is going to happen, and literally anything could happen at any moment? And when people, I think, are really honest with themselves, the vast majority of them would choose the mysterious, ever unfolding, infinite universe of possibility. But that's not how we act most of the time. Most of the time we act like we want the little white capsule.
Yeah, like we're not trying to unplug from the matrix. We're trying to clamber in there and jack ourselves in. Right?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, wait, hey now. Because that sounds very similar to like the Shiva Shakti two-step, right? That idea of like, yes, just unitive consciousness gets really dull after a few billion years.
Yeah.
So let's split up and play hide and seek.
Yeah.
Right. And it's that yearning, right? That ever becoming, which funnily enough, right, like goes to like Alfred North Whitehead's process philosophy. It goes to Hegel's dialectic. It's not a singular fixed location or state of being or attainment.
Yeah.
It is the backing and the forthing. It is the spaces in between, right? It is the ecotones. It's the edge habitats, right? It's where a meadow meets a forest is where most life happens. It's in the tidal pools and the transition between land and sea where most life is born, right? And it is that backing and the forthing, which, oh, by the way, is just like sex. Because you're like, oh, well, is it in or is it out? Which is better? And you're like, it's the backing and the forthing, isn't it? That's where the juju happens. And you're like, oh, we are participants and creations of the cosmic fuck.
Yeah.
And it is, and death is fixity. Death is stasis.
Yeah.
Death is preferring one location to another versus deep surrender into the experience, you know, and that's true with even evolution's impulses, right? It's the back, even, you know, Bruce Damer, I don't know if you know him. He's a burner PhD, NASA astrophysicist. And 4 years ago, they published a new theory of the origins of life. So it used to be like ocean thermal vents and this and that. And then it's actually turned out to be hot springs.
Yeah.
Right. And even Fly Geyser, like Fly Ranch in the Burning Man community, like is one of the actual real life locations, which is just crazy serendipity. But they found that it's actually in the, it's not just sitting in the hot tub. It's the actual pond scum. It's the bathtub rim of hot springs was the place that life went from mechanical to biological. And it was the heat and the cooling. It was the proximity and then the separation, the proximity and the separation. You're like, oh man. Like death writes the code to life. Yeah. And we today are thanato, which just is the Greek word for death, thanato neurotic. We're terrified of death, right? We do plastic surgery and Botox and, you know, and hair dyes, and we ship our elders off to nursing homes to be cared for by strangers and drugged to the gills, right? We're like, what are we doing? Right. And so how do we go from thanato neurotic, right, constantly stiff arming it, even our prevention of wildfires and our damming of rivers and all the lopsided shit that creates, right? We resist that essential element of the cycle of creation and destruction. But if you can go from thanato neurotic to thanato erotic, right, where you embrace God, sex, and death. Yeah. Right? Like that is far more aligned, like almost from a Taoist perspective. Like it only sucks when you struggle, right? Like if you align with that process, and then we can celebrate it. And when you were describing, so many people are sad these days, so many people are anxious, we're dying for the Klonopin, and we're out seeking our individual enlightenment or healing. I think that is also a terminal trap, right? It's too big. And if you're actually wrestling with these forces, we need collective community ritual, and rituals that begin with sacrifice, with offerings, not takings, not to what do I need, right? But what can I give? What can I, and how can we, you know, this is Martine Prachtel's phrasing, but like, how can we feed the holy, right? It's not that we're a pox on this earth, right? We kill animals to eat. We chop down trees to burn, to keep, you know, for our hearth or for our homes. Like there's a tax. Right? We use the things that we do, but rather than sort of feeling self-judgmental and puritanical, like original sin, we were kicked east of Eden, all of that, you can actually be like, oh no, we're here. Don't go and leave no trace, like make a mark. Like leave this place better than we found it. Make offerings, acknowledge the sunrise, acknowledge the rain, acknowledge the seasons, like, and participate in ways that we have forgotten. I mean, I know you mentioned like the joylessness, arguably, of like Judeo-Christian tradition compared to the left-hand path. But, you know, to be fair, right, Shiva Tantrism, like the Orthodox Hindus fucking hate that bunch, right?
No, for sure.
Right. And so ecstatics, right, have always around the world for time immemorial, always been a fringe group and almost often been violently or passively repressed by the powers that be. Right. I think of it kind of as like the priests versus the Prometheans. There's been this thousands of year game of hide and seek between the ones who steal fire, the Prometheans, and the priests looking to shut it down and like maintain their middleman status between the divine and the mundane. And, you know, the men in black, you know, cassocks became the men in black suits. It's no, you know, it sort of morphs as to who are the power holders of society. But that's the game that's been afoot. Yeah. Right, is the hide and seek, and that ecstatic element has always been unstable. Right, it's always unstable. Like
maybe not always though. I mean, because I've really been wondering with the kind of, you know, research now in the immortality key and things like that of, you know, this tradition of high priestesses and witches. And serving sacraments and hosting ecstatic orgies in the name of divine remembrance. And you use the word Promethean, right? Which is to take fire from the gods. And maybe there's a less patriarchal version of that, right? Where the gods gift you fire so that you can spread it to as many people as want it. And that battle between the priests and the Prometheans is like a battle between people who would rather control access to sovereign remembrance and people who would rather freebase it to as much of the population as possible responsibly, right? And so there's this original heart to me of maybe our origins, if we go farther back than written history, we all actually supported each other in divine remembrance rather than tried to like lock each other's gates and like pretend like we were holding the key to each other's access, which is like the silliest game in the universe. And what does it look like to not think anymore that it's like special people's abilities to remind us of our spiritual power, but literally what we're born to do for each other. Like that we're all secret Prometheans.
Yeah. I mean,
but we do have to talk about sex because I promised like 40 minutes ago that you would talk about sex research.
I'm just sandbagging you. But
I want to hear about the sex magic, Jamie.
Yeah. I mean, look, there is, you know, implicit in the positions we're taking in this, right, is there a retro romantic position to take? This is Chalice and the Blade, this is Women Who Dance with Wolves, this is, you know, all of that. Is there a time before the burnings? Right?
Or maybe women have always been just as bitchy and power hungry as men, who knows?
Well, you know, and, you know, critiques of Western Judeo-Christian colonialist imperial culture, all of those things. And my sense is, you know, just from a background in history and anthropology, you know, academically, right, is a sense is as much as I want, you know, was yearning for those stories as well as a young, you know, wannabe transcendentalist romantic. I'm not sure they're actually that helpful. Yeah. Because I think we've always been messy and complicated. And I think these have always been ebbing and flowing patterns. And if you go to, you know, the Mediterranean, you've got Cybele, right? The ancient Anatolian earth goddess who then morphs into Artemis, Diana, and it's Apollo, Artemis with the Delphic oracle. And you've got all those things. So you're like, okay, so the goddess is alive and she, you know, and then she becomes the Black Madonna, you know, in Eastern Europe. And you've almost got this syncretic quasi-Christian Kali situation going on. You're like, okay, so all the cast of characters have been playing this game of hide and seek in meme, you know, in the noosphere forever. And humans have been generally equally purposely shitty versus saying, oh, there was the fall from grace with the agrarian revolution or with European colonization or whatever it might be. Because if you take a look, you know, the two thought experiments that I think are really helpful is like, oh, well, let's think about this. Right around 10 to 15,000 years ago, so sort of pre-civilization, last ice ages, humans everywhere they had populations hunted all their available megafauna to extinction worldwide. Yeah. Woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and dire wolves and original horses and you name it, we murdered the lot. Yeah. Because we could. Whoops. And then you go back 100,000 years before that, or 300,000 years, 250 to 300,000 years before that, where there were 9 different concurrent species of hominids on the planet, and we murdered the lot. Right? So you're like, oh, we are murderous chimps and we overconsume and we always have. And just to like level set that, and then be like, oh, fuck, okay, this too. Like, if we really want to talk about tantric anthropology.
I mean, are we murderous chimps or are we orgiastic bonobos? You know, it's like.
Yeah, and it's both and neither, right? And it always, you know, and like asking any academic, you know, colleague that I look up to, anytime I ask any question that I'm dying to know the answer to about neuroscience or about sexuality, they're always like, well, it's complicated and it depends.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so can we sit in that?
Yeah.
But without collapsing into convenient or subtly moralizing just so stories.
Yeah.
Because the just so stories of we fell from grace.
Yeah.
Disempowers us, and I think we both sort of shirk responsibility and therefore limit our agency versus like same as it ever was.
Although I think the same as it ever was is interesting, right? Because in some ways you could use that as like a liberation story to say, well, maybe it was always that way, but who cares? Now's the moment we can do whatever we want, right? Yeah. In some ways it's liberating. I think, and I know that you don't really like getting into identity politics. I don't really particularly love it either, but there is something to be said for the fact that like, I'm a high motherfucking priestess, right? Like I do things that just didn't exist when I was growing up, right? Like I can stand in a room and like activate the ecstatic potential of everyone in it. Like I can preside over experiences where people's like Eros wakes up inside of them in ways that I wasn't able to explain when I was young, right? There's all these things that I could do. When I was a teenager, I read about Maenads, right? The female high priestesses of Dionysian rites. And Dionysus, I was like, god of wine, man. I don't even like drinking anymore. What the fuck? No, Dionysus was the god of all sacraments, including magic mushrooms, right? So this magical ability in me simply didn't exist. It had been eviscerated from the planet by the time I came around, right, in the 1980s. And people like me got murdered, or they were like old, ugly witches in the forest by themselves eating children. So there's also this gift in being like, well, if I'm something that doesn't seem to exist on the planet, but I remember it inside myself, there must have been a time when this was allowed. Like there must have been a time when this thrived in a way that I don't seem to be able to thrive now, right? With like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, who are like fucking high priestess witches too, just like put through the ringer of 2000s culture. And so there's this moment of not trying to be like, oh yeah, Garden of Eden, everything was perfect once, but being like, knowing that there was a time in human history where my kind not only thrived, but was supported, gives me at least the ability to dream of a future and an experience that I didn't grow up with, right? So that's where like this historical kind of, oh, hey, people like me in ancient Europe used to preside over sacred festivals of ecstatic remembrance of the goddess. Did they quickly get persecuted by the Roman Empire? Totally, right? Even pre-Christianity. Like, were we already problematic back then? Like, absolutely. And yet knowing that there was like a moment and probably many moments in history where I got to exist in a different way gives me like almost like a momentum to know not only could I exist again, but how many other people there are like me on the planet that just fucking forgot, and how sad that is, because so many of us are witches and high priestesses and presiders over like ecstatic rites, and we just had no idea. Yeah.
Well, can I offer both a critique and a frame that also includes the truth of what you just said?
Yeah.
All right. So my sense is, and I think this is in the opening page of Ken Kesey's Wonderful of the Cuckoo's Nest, right? Which is that story of the insane asylum narrated by the chief broom, the Indian. And he goes on this rant. And he's like, no one even knows what the moon and I have going on, right? And he's like, and he finishes it with, and it's the truth, even if it didn't happen, right? So it's beautiful, right? And I would propose that many of the stories that often get told, let's say in the last 20 to 30 years, especially in the Starhawk onwards, you know, to Rihanna Eisler, to like that neck of the woods and that kind of genesis into the subsequent generations that have been taking cuts at it, including hashtag TikTok witches, right? So that genre is anthropologically on dubious ground.
Yeah.
But the truths of what they're saying, which is, hey, women are powerful beyond our means, and we've been under the boot of a dysfunctional, fucked up. I mean, just look at the abortion stuff that's going on, and look at the men, often Christian men, who are behind most of you. Like, okay, that's fucked up. This is not a policy thing. This is not about biology. This is not about the difference between zygotes and fetuses. This is repression of feminine sexuality, because the same exact arguments were the ones that were trotted out when the birth control pill came out. And you still see that shit bubble out in unscripted moments on Fox News. Like, what is our federal dollars playing for women to be sluts? And you're like, oh, okay, you just tipped your hand entirely here, right? So yes, the truth of that can be totally legit. But take neo-paganism. I mean, I grew up within sight of Stonehenge and like Hampshire and the New Forest, so like super rootsy, old school England. And right near where I grew up, in Hampshire in the whatever it was 50s, Gerald Gardner was the one who started the story of I'm an intact coven of witches, and here's the story. And then it turned out it was all made up. Right. And even Adam Curtis, that crazy BBC documentarian who does all stuff, has launched made an argument that, and I still want to go deeper on this because this fascinates me, but made an argument that it was late Victorian to early 20th century England, as they were getting industrialized and as they were beginning to lose their power on empire and all this thing, that they actually kind of ginned up this whole medieval, wonderful, groovy story of maypoles and the Green Man and all of this stuff. But it was basically a sort of memeplex. It was a marketing campaign. And the one that breaks my heart, I've never had a story I've wanted to believe in more that I don't think I can hang my hat on anymore, is the story of the perennial nature of the sacrificial king. Of which Jesus was one, but then the Green Man trafficked the rock band singing that tune, John Barleycorn, which is like John Barley, we cut you down in the fall, but then you rise up again in the bread and the beer, the ale that we make. And
Osiris and Dionysus.
Osiris, Dionysus, all of it, right? And the lineage of that is James Frazier's Golden Bow, that book, which was one of the OG neo-pagan books in the early 20th century. Robert Graves, who's one of my favorite fucking poets and mythologists ever, took it. Tom Robbins, the author, like Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, he wrote that book, Jitterbug Perfume, one of my all-time favorites, and that too is about the sacrificial king. And then you're like, oh shit, so it's the truth even if it didn't happen. These are such deep structural memes. If you go through it with a scholarly lens and you really look for chain of evidence, you're like, I'm not sure that's exactly right. Or Carlos Castaneda, for fuck's sake, right? Like Carlos Castaneda gets debunked.
Totally.
Right? But he was also into the pudding. He was some dark wizard yogi.
Yeah.
To bring through what he brought through that lit up an entire generation of seekers when there weren't any other user manuals of North American magic and mysticism. Yeah. Right? Even if he was in the libraries at UCLA pulling shit out of his ass. Right? He was getting it from someplace. So I guess what I would offer on the reframe, or the both and, is give ourselves permission to riff fully and without apology in the realms of the imaginal mythopoetic, right? And that's the Jungian concept of the imaginal, not just imagination, I made it up, but imaginal, the realm of mind and possibility, and mythopoetic's ultimate epic tales. And then we can play with those, but we don't need to conflate, especially, I mean, it's whatever you want to do as a leader, as an artist, as a writer, a creator, fucking go with it. But for audiences, I think it really is important to show our work and to have footnotes. So it's like, so rather than I'm in a position of authority, because like there's that, I remember in my Catholic school upbringing, right, in Latin class, right, my Latin teacher had a quote from Ovid that we had to translate, and it was, who looking down on 20 or 30 upturned shining faces doesn't sometimes say more than he knows, right? So as we are breaking old paradigms, as we are inviting people to cast off the shackles of the patriarchal dominant hierarchy system, like as we're inviting people to live their own mythic tales, let's be as clean as we can in saying, hey, a story, may it come, may it go, versus fusing historical truths, historicity, causation, sociopolitics, what do we do now as a result if that's true? Same with like 1619 Project, things like that, right? The stories we tell about the past inform the agency and choices we have in the present, and also give us labels as the cast of characters of how that story continues today. So like being as precise as we can so that we can actually play more playfully and freely with those very same stories. Because there's no doubt, right? All that ancient archaeology 40,000 years ago, one of the earliest, most consistent things are goddess mother figurines. You're like, that's definitely they're there.
Totally.
Right?
That's the thing. You don't have to make a bunch of shit up to say women used to have a level of spiritual power that they have not had for a few thousand years on this planet. And when they had that spiritual power, there were rites and goddess rituals and ways of being that have not existed for a period of time. Like, you don't have to make a bunch of shit up to acknowledge that. And I can literally feel the truth and the transmission of what that was for humanity through time and space. Because if I know what that is now in my own body, to be a high priestess and a witch, and what that brings in my partnership, what that brings in my world, what that brings to a party, what that brings to the moment, then I don't have to make a bunch of shit up to say there was more magic happening back when women were allowed to be in their spiritual power. And I don't have to make stuff up to say you can still get killed for being a witch on this planet. You can still get shut down for being a high priestess and claiming your spiritual power when you have a pussy in many places on this planet. So when I'm claiming a kind of anthropological rootedness and saying there was a time when people like me were more allowed to exist, I don't think I'm playing with fantasy. I think I'm being fairly conservative in that assessment. Has it always been challenging? Maybe. That I don't know. Like, if you go far enough back, like when they were making those Venus figurines, was there someone like, I don't know, man, shut it down?
Shut it down.
All right, let's talk about sex. So actually, let me check really quick because I have a flight to Egypt. All right, good. We got a little time.
Well, I'll tell you what, here's a bridge, right?
Yeah.
Because to your point, right? I think that anybody in their right mind that contemplates humans, anatomy, physiology, and masculine and feminine, and then just marvels at a woman's body. And the idea that she is capable of endless and infinite pleasure and arousal. She is capable of connecting her bits to a man's bits, and lightning bolts shoot out and create a state. You're like these two little hominids who have 8,000 nerve endings here and 7,500 nerve endings here, and mouths that kind of match. And if you flip, they also match. Like that's our other highest concentration of nerve endings. And we can do this amazing stuff together, and we can do it beyond the baseline needs of reproduction and being in heat. All right. And they can do it forever, all the time. You're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then, holy smokes, as a result, also multi-purpose vessel can take that seed of life and grow it into more life, and then deliver it from that very same place that provided all of that magic and transcendence. And then, oh my gosh, nurse a fledgling little baby into wholeness. Like, how is not the entire fucking planet a goddess worshiping cult?
Right. And then have a Kundalini awakening from a cervical orgasm.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah. You're like, that's pretty badass.
It's fucking dope.
And dudes are like one trick ponies. Yeah. So like, if we're not.
They're not though.
Well, yeah. But if you're not giving it up to the mystery and the miracle of the feminine form, I don't know what we're doing. And that's not to be remotely ooey gooey about it. I think that's just like legit, like assessment. You're like, good God, of course this is the center of our existence. And shouldn't we treat it accordingly?
Jamie, tell me about the sex research.
Yeah, here you go. All right. That was an extended aside. This
has been one long podcast tease.
Yeah, there we go. Isn't that appropriate? Right? So all hopped up and no place to go. So where we left off that thread was basically saying, hey, human sexuality is hardwired to our deepest evolutionarily encoded both pleasure networks and autonomic nervous system.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, that would make sense if we can use that to help healing, inspiration, and connection. And we're obviously lacking in all of those these days. But the real insights I had was I was giving a talk at the Battery Club up in San Francisco, and it was with Rick Doblin from MAPS and our friend Jason Silva. And the three of us were on stage, and we were just kind of riffing on the future of psychedelic culture, blah, blah, blah. And then in a sort of set break in between, I was like, so Rick, how's it going? Catch me up on the phase 2 trials. How's it going? And he's like, yeah, as a matter of fact, what we've been finding are we've been doing like neurochemical assessments as to what's happening for these people who are engaging in the MDMA therapy, who have suffered from PTSD. Yeah. And what we're noticing is a couple of things. One is that memories are actually turn out to be pretty plastic, fluid, right? And it's not just a fixed thing like a memory of past trauma. You can take them off the shelf you can talk about them, you can work with them, and then you can put them back on a different shelf. And you are actually different, and your past is actually different as a result. And the neurophysiological correlates of that is like high vasopressin, high oxytocin, high prolactin. And he goes, and one of our researchers, like the closest correlate or analog we can find to that is the post-orgasmic state. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me?
Well, you know what's super dope is in like my practices and like the Vita methodology, it's all developed so that people do personal transformation while they're doing pleasure practices and having orgasm experiences because their nervous system is more plastic during that time. Like it's more malleable, and the transformation gets accelerated when you're literally doing transformational processes while you're in a heightened state of pleasure and erotic activation.
Yeah, exactly. And while that could be sort of, dismissed or not, because people think, oh, that's just bullshit New Age Tantra stuff. Like this was actually, empirical validation of like, hey, the same neurochemicals, you just get them from a pill that happens to be Schedule 1 and tightly controlled for now and increasingly accessible, but for a long, long, long time, tightly controlled, accessible, or straight up illegal and underground. You're like, oh my gosh, if everybody has the capacity to be in or near a post-orgasmic state, and that can lead to radical and empirically validated healing, that's worth paying attention to. And so that was my first kind of like breadcrumb down the rabbit hole.
Also without a hangover, because like you can only do MDMA so much, right?
Yeah,
but you can have as many orgasms as you want. So
well, the MDMA is methamphetamine. Let's not forget, kids.
Totally.
It's gnarly and hard on a nervous system and your neurochemistry.
Yeah.
And so that led me to come across Dr. Nicole Prousey's work. And she was a sort of wunderkind researcher at the Kinsey Institute, the obviously well-known sexual institute study. She did her postdoc at Harvard. She was then at UCLA. And she's been researching orgasm as prescription effectively, specifically for women, and just the ideas of, can it cure anxiety? Can it help alleviate insomnia, physical pain, any inflammatory diseases, all of these things. And she's gone as far as basically saying, hey, look, even a bunch of sex health researchers actually subtly shame people. Like if I come home after a hard day at work and I masturbate and have an orgasm, that's poor coping skills, and you need to figure out something else to do, play video games or go golf.
Totally. People shame me as a Tantra teacher. I'm like, have a 5-minute orgasm as much as you want. Like stressed out during work, like fucking lock the bathroom door, get on the floor. I like love to have an orgasm on my closet floor, like on a regular basis. And it's sort of like, why are you coping? It's like you're like taking a swig of vodka or whatever. And you're like, no, it actually like buoys your nervous system in this it feels like an ocean of love and pleasure, which is probably just like prolactin, dopamine, all the things,
Yeah. And so, you put those two together and throw in Helen Fisher's research, who was also, she's an alumna of Kinsey, but then the chief scientist for Match.com, who's done tons of research on, both the 3 stages of, lust, attraction, and bonding, and then also the neurochemistry of our sexual arousal patterns and how that correlates to how we engage the rest of our life. All of that kind of work, you're like, wow, okay, these are really long levers. Yeah. This is cheap to free, obviously, super accessible. Not repressible either. Like we all have possession of our bodies, at least for the most part, right? Except in extreme instances, of denial. And
totally.
Right. And
although it's still so hard, right? That's what I tell people, like, isn't it wild that even in the privacy of your own bedroom, your asshole still feels like a huge issue? Like it's a portal to God, and it's still like, you can't just easily take off all that cultural conditioning and repression the moment you enter your bedroom. It comes with you.
Yeah, for sure.
Unless you get rid of it.
Well, and then the simplest is, to get into the research that we then did. Because I did this initial lab, and I'm like, wait, it definitely seems like there's a there. And it seems like there's some empirical validation. And one of Nicole's final studies was also on fundamentally on orgasmic meditation. So 15 minutes of clitoral stroking, and does that, and how does that stack up? How does that stack up to the Johns Hopkins studies on mystical experience and psilocybin studies and all of those things? And, sure enough, it did show up, as you mentioned earlier, on being able to produce comparable mystical states according to the MEQ30, which is the sort of gold standard mystical experience questionnaire. As psilocybin, and then in the peakest states and the highest states, actually even higher than the psilocybin. And so you're like, okay, so we've correlated that from the MAPS MDMA therapy the neurochemistry is the same as orgasm or post-orgasm. And we've also correlated that, in a different, distinct study, that having those orgasms can produce mystical states. So we've got a physiological bit and a psychological bit, and you put them together and they're the tits. You're like, yes, this is absolutely fantastic stuff. So now, what would it look like to put these together into integrated protocols? And that's where we ran a 12-week study with 10 couples to basically have them combine these things, but then let's measure it. Because obviously everything you just said, there's so much shame, there's so much guilt, there's so much social stuff, there's so much repression, there's so much squirreliness on the relational, psychological, like it's a minefield, right? Human sexuality is a goddamn minefield, and it's a thankless job to get anywhere near it.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't want to do this, but if we're gonna, let's do it right. And let's figure out, okay, is this increasing access to peak states? Is this helping you connect better to your partner, making more love, right? And is this helping us relieve or alleviate trauma? And then took 2 benchmark metrics off the shelf. So they're out there, they're used in other studies, so they can talk, the research and the findings can talk to each other. And we used a flow state scale, like how in the moment do I feel day to day, the same mystical experience questionnaire for the peak states, so we could track that. Then for connection, we did the intimacy of self and other scale, which you are probably familiar with, which is just a series of Venn circles. How close and overlapped do we feel from like we are one to we don't touch, right? And you can just kind of look at them and couples can point. And then the PANAS scale, the positive and negative affect scale. So like, how stoked am I to be in this relationship, living my life right now? So that was the relational one. And then the final one was trauma. And we did basically the PCL-5 scale, which is the do-it-yourself trauma scale. The CAPS trauma scale is the gold standard, but that's with a therapist and an interview and too costly for us to scale out. And then also baseline HRV. So the idea of like, okay, the PCL-5 scale, that will tell me about my historic trauma, the big hits, childhood abuse, adverse life events. But day to day, how fucked up is my nervous system versus defragged? And so the overnight resting heart rate variability is a good metric of that. And what we found over that 12 weeks was that, interestingly, women had the highest delta in variance. They started out coming in with holding more trauma, but they had a bigger healing and amending, both in their relationship to their historic adverse life events, as well as their week to week physiology. And that the couples experienced increased closeness, which I wasn't actually super surprised by that, because you're doing a dedicated 12-week program to be closer. So you're kind of like, okay, that's a correlation causation kind of thing. But the peak states were also exceeded the psilocybin states, and many subjective reports where these were some of the most profound, non-ordinary states I've had in my life. So basically everything went up high and to the right, and it went higher and more to the right than regular conventional talk therapy and even therapist assisted psychedelic therapy. So you're like, wait, we can do this at home by ourselves, for ourselves, and we can experience the most healing, inspiration, and connection we ever have in our lives. Seemed like a worthwhile outcome. And what it felt like was it was a continuum, right? So the first half of the practices were basically delivering what I would sort of call sexual fitness, right? All you're doing is thinking about all the normal things that people would do. And that could be body work, that could be myofascial stuff, that could be breath work, that could be mindfulness. You could take a pick of all the good things you can possibly do, and then simply add partner-based sexual arousal and stimulation. And then it's just more, basically like twice as much, So just think again, like it became what some participants called sort of a sexual yoga of becoming. And then the second half is, if you increase that, intensify it, and then really turn it all up to 11, then you get into non-ordinary states, mystical states, transpersonal states. And it's very much just kind of a sliding scale. If you're starting, you're just sticking to the basics and you're kind of just you're flossing your teeth version. It's going to help me defrag my nervous system on a daily basis. It's going to keep me more primed and saturated with the happy neurochemical cascade versus the agitated sympathetic neurochemical cascade. Good for you. 100% beneficial and worthwhile. And if that's as far as you want to take it, awesome. Do that. And on the other hand, if you want to keep going in that journey, it can lead all the way to the doorstep of what has only ever been described in esoteric wisdom traditions. So it was kind of interesting.
So Jamie, what you're saying is if you were to maybe take people and give them a safe and contained space in which to learn a sexual methodology and invite them into transformative research-based practices that allowed them to shift their nervous system and their state of consciousness as they revisited their patterns from the past inside of themselves and gave them a platform in which to accelerate their sexual growth and evolution and to be able to be more intimate and connected in their sexual experiences, and taught them the practices like breath work and sounding and meditation and even energy activation that allowed them to accelerate the natural ability of their body to access spiritual states of consciousness and mystical awakening through sexuality, that you would possibly be giving them one of the most rapid maps to spiritual awakening, personal and development and trauma integration available to humankind.
Why do I get the sense that you're putting some words in my mouth? Yes.
And the only reason I asked this question, Jamie, is because as someone who's been doing this work for 20 years, isn't it funny that I've been blacklisted by Meta? You know, that like the work that I do is still black sheeped, right? Like it's still like, even when I went to Stanford and started developing work along these lines and talking about this, that it was so shamed and ridiculed. And so I bring it up not to put words in your mouth, but to say, you are articulating my lifetime's work, right? Like what I actually do. And isn't it fascinating that not only is the world still so ashamed and afraid and guilt-ridden to go directly there, but even those of us who are doing that work are still socially treated with a level of ridicule or less than, when actually, like what I see and have known for a long time, is that we're doing some of the highest level work that can be done for humanity. And like, I say it as a joke, but it's not a fucking joke that you can run ads for Viagra on platforms, and I can't run an ad for a crystal egg, which trains people how to do this work, right? Because you put it up your vagina, that you can be Coca-Cola and sell toxic sugar water to children and run all the ads you want. And I can't be on any platform talking about this level of sexual transformation and evolution without getting banned in some way, shape, or form from being able to share my work, and just the upside downness of that in our whole society. And the reason I bring this up is that this work needs to be celebrated and seen and upheld, and to go through the kind of transformation that psychedelics and breathwork and meditation have. You know, 20 years ago, meditation was still woo-woo and, you know, whatever, crazy and weird, and psychedelics were still
satanic. Yeah,
totally. Like doing ayahuasca 10 years ago was still like, woo, you know, and now it's actually starting to be given the respect and honor and culture that it deserves. And so the reason that I said that is that I really desire for sexuality teachings and sacred sexuality and tantra and Taoist practices to be given the cultural level of respect and honor that they deserve, because they are some of the most potent practices available to us.
Yeah, they are. And unstable, really hard to manage, and therefore volatile and dangerous. So I think like the truth in advertising is also super important. Like, yes, if you put all this stuff together, the question goes from, does it work, to, yeah, it works better than you can possibly imagine, and where are your brakes and your steering.
Yeah.
So I think the simplest, you know, and yet given that, is not validation for persecution or marginalization. So you're like, okay, let's be really explicit. This is NC-17.
Yeah.
5th class rock climbing.
Yeah.
Right? It's not for kids, and the falls can kill you.
Yeah.
And if you go wandering up a mountain in the Himalayas and you don't know an ice axe from your asshole, right? And you're just up there to take the photos, and you fall into a crevasse, you're a stupid fuckwit and you shouldn't have been up there. Right.
Well, maybe also, though, people have emphasized getting people to the top of the mountain versus giving them the skills to get there safely. Right. So one of the things that I found in my work, right, in 15 years of teaching, I've never had people have Kundalini issues. I've never had people have like massive freakouts. And part of the reason is we preface all of our work with foundations of training around self-love, first and foremost. Like wading into the waters of deep sexuality, if you don't know how to foundationally love the different parts of yourself, is a fool's game. Understanding your own nervous system, right? What it is to be out of your window of tolerance, what it is to be the owner and operator of a nervous system, so that you understand how to function and self-care in a way that you can handle these pieces, and to understand the pitfalls of erotic activation and the power inherent in it so that you wield it with a level of responsibility and self-compassion, a level of humility as well. And the only reason I say this isn't, and so of course, in some way, like I'm proud of that. I'm proud that we teach in a safe and responsible way.
Yeah, they have a safety record.
But I'm also saying it because I think sometimes people end up being far more scared of these practices than they need to be, because there actually is just a beauty and power to them when you have a fundamentally integrated foundation on which to hold them. It doesn't take that long to give that to people. It's just a rewiring of some of the ways that they've been trained to relate to themselves and some of the ways that they've been trained to fear their own energy awakening and sexual expression. Because a lot of the liberatory expressions of the sexual gateway to mysticism have been classed, especially in European society, as mental illness or demonic, right? Because if you're going to actually make your way to a mystical state of sexual consciousness, your body is often shaking, right? Like your tongue can hang out, you can be, sweating, you can be in states of like rapture that look nothing like pretty nice girl pornographic sex anymore. And that's been coded for us as there's something wrong with you. Maybe there's a mental health issue. Maybe it's demonic, right? And so part of the portal for mystical states of sexual awakening, in my experience, requires that people who have been brainwashed to be terrified of the liberated expression of their own body and energy system be re-educated so that they understand the divine nature of those expressions and that they are able to have reverence for them rather than fear. I find when people get that kind of foundational teaching, the sacred sexual practices actually unfold with a lot more integration and peace and grace.
Yeah, and I think not dissimilar to our conversation about left and right hand paths.
Yeah.
My sense there is that what I hear you unpacking is a very healthy distinction between socially conditioned fear, right, a fundamentally irrational fear, right, to healthy acceptance or embrace. And then I think there's a deep and abiding respect for the, and awe for the power, majesty, and lethality of Kali in her full aspect, right? So the sense of like...
Which is your unconscious mind. Kali is a representative of the forces of the unconscious mind. So it's like when you go deep diving into these realms, you're inviting an activation of the primal unconscious. And unless you know that and want that, buyer beware. Maybe. And I don't know that our buddy David Data might have been responsible for some of this, right? when he, to much acclaiming and reading by New Age young boys, like you, and I suppose women as well, right? That the whole idea that like the feminine is irrational and wild and maniac, right? And all of those things, and the masculine is stable and strong and penetrating, and I think a whole generation came up with that kind of DNA on board, and I think it was obviously helpful and insightful, and then becomes problematic when taken as the only expression, right? And I mean, just to playfully take a counter on the Kali, like I'm not sure a being that vast submits to being a figment of our unconscious imaginations or part of us or a subset of us in any way. No, I wouldn't say that she's a figment of our imagination. What I understand, and I worked with a jungle tantrika who taught me the codes of insight into this, and I found them to be extremely relevant and true, is that the Hindu deities, and especially the deities of Shakti, are coded representations of the different stages of activation of Kundalini consciousness. And so one of the reasons that Kali is a foundational goddess is that when Kundalini awakens, some of the early stages are the profound and potent stirrings of the unconscious mind and the activation of the repressed, unlooked at shadow elements that are often terrifying to people until you become devoted to them, in which they transform into the ever-loving benevolent mother. So my understanding of Kali consciousness, which this is not theoretical, this is actual relationship to this, and I say this all as a white woman who has profound reverence for the Indian tradition, which left this legacy for me to experience, that these coded mythologies can actually keep us going on the path rather than being afraid. Because if you know that when you activate sacred sexuality, which will activate Kundalini consciousness eventually, which is just code for embodied goddess consciousness, what will happen is that energy consciousness, while it will have a different expression in every individual human being, has a kind of universal roadmap. And so oftentimes when people first activate that energy, what shows up first is the shadow pieces, the unfelt emotional experiences, the things they haven't wanted to look at. And as you have referenced, a kind of ego death to what they thought spiritual awakening was going to be, right? And in that, your body actually moves that way. There's a lot of like gross movements, like tongue out, eyes rolled back in your head, like lots of shaking, right? You actually start to look
spontaneous mudras,
like the expression of Kali as this awakening is happening. And so the biggest key code here is that when we think of it as terrifying, she is terrifying. And when we think of it as divine and actually have reverential worship with it and a personal relationship to the divine and wise consciousness of Kundalini activation, Kali becomes our greatest ally and guide. And as the energy continues to activate, you have lots of different expressions, right? You have Tara consciousness, which is the consciousness of compassion and flow. You can find Durga, which is when you come into your power, more of the Manipura activation, like striding alongside on a tiger, finding the alignment of your will and expression in the world. Sarasvati in the higher activated chakras, which is the expression of genius and music, and it's so much more sublime, right? So like Kali and the darker goddesses, which are just symbolic of tamas, more heaviness, including Black Tara, are the lower chakra activations. Then you have the middle chakras, and more of the sublime goddesses, including Kamala and things like that, are representation of how the energy flows in the higher chakras. So the idea, though, is that when you are initiated in a way that you trust the energy and you understand the living wisdom consciousness of it, it manifests in a far less dangerous way and manifests in a far more harmonious way because you're in direct devotional relationship to it. And sometimes in the Western spiritual path, that's what I feel like we've lost. Even the way we relate to Kundalini, it's like this foreign experience in our body rather than like, no, that's goddess consciousness, like that is you inside of you, and you can be in continuous relationship with that energy because it's living, it's conscious, it's alive. And when people cultivate that relationship, I find a lot of the dangerous expressions of Kundalini that people talk about, which can happen, are very, very mitigated.
Yeah, I mean, nicely said to unpack that, the goddess stack.
Yeah.
Right. And the different expressions. What comes up for me listening to you is the difference between the authentic realization of an individual, in this case, potentially you, right? Having, as you said, been in some direct relationship to a lineage transmission, right? Versus what skillful means teaching it, right? And so that, Krishnamurti was a great example, where he had that profound awakening, and I think he was even in Ojai when it happened, and he had to shut the shutters, and he was so sensitive, to light and sound and all of these things, and his brother was like having to bring him meals and all of that, and then he just woke up into the suchness of things.
Yeah.
And then he spent, I don't know what, 5-10 years just trying to communicate that to people.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh, for fuck's sake, people. Okay, I got to break this shit down. I got to break into a million pieces and give you and spoon feed you, right, a step at a time, right? And Trungpa, while he had all sorts of train wrecks later in his career, right, had
started off strong.
Started off with some legit insights, and yet was still like, how do I bring the Dharma to the West? Oh fuck, I've got to break down the one into the many.
Yeah.
Right. And so what is skillful and helpful, fundamentally, operating instructions or incremental progressions to teach that set people up for success versus, and because especially in these realms, right? I mean, I always think of like, there's a Far Side cartoon with like two mosquitoes, and one of them is stuck into an arm and he's blown up like a blimp. He's like, pull out, Hal, pull out, you hit an artery. Right. And that's kind of where we are with ecstatic practices right now. Like people stick their straws in and they're like, blow their minds.
Yeah.
And there's also a real pitfall. I mean, fundamentally, I would just say, like, again, back to like caveat emptor,
Yeah.
is this path, lies ruin,
Yeah.
madness, addiction, and death. Proceed cautiously, and so what you just described there, gorgeous, right? Like a beautiful unpacking and integration of the Hindu pantheon, right? And a deeper cut in unlocking kind of the holographic truths of Kali.
Yeah.
And including like, she'll take your fucking head off while she's straddling you,
Yeah.
right? If you show up with ego, that's what you can expect.
Yeah.
If you show up humble and in devotion, she'll cradle you in her arms as the mother.
Yes.
Right? You're like, beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? And on the other hand, what you laid out is just the roadmap for spiritual bypassing and spiritual materialism for every half-assed wannabe suburban pseudo goddess on the planet.
Yes. And I mean, that's
which gives permission to be like, oh, I'm in my yoga. Oh, I'm doing this. Oh, no, you're not. You're just being a bitch today. Or no, you're not. You're not being reliable, or you're being erratic or neurotic or whatever it might be. That's a very human psychological expression.
100%. And this is also the value of a good teacher and a good tradition.
Yeah.
Because any good spiritual teacher worth their salt will spend 10 times as much time and energy teaching you to be in a foundational, devotional, loving, and humble relationship to yourself and to the moment as they will giving you access to ecstatic practices.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
that's what builds the foundation. And so to me, ecstatic practices aren't inherently dangerous. It's the unwillingness sometimes in our society to do the everyday integrating work that gives you the foundation where the ecstatic practices are not an addictive escape, but like a nourishing salve for the human experience.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because you're running and mashing up lineage traditions, iconographies, and meme plexes, right? You're playing with, right, the Eastern tantric tradition, and I would say not in any way in practice, more like by default. I kind of come up, like I said, out of that sort of almost Pythagorean rational mysticism into what accidentally then becomes Crowleyan sex magic, into Leary, into Robert Anton Wilson, into like that realm. So it's almost like where there's a masculine feminine thing, but there's also an East-West thing going on in our conversation.
Well, I also carry a lot of Western tradition as well, but the Western tradition I feel like has gotten more distorted because it was decimated earlier than the tantric tradition. The tantric tradition got decimated a lot by colonialism as well, and just by time and repression and things like that. But the Western traditions, people forget this, were decimated usually by Christianity a few thousand years ago. And so some of the deeper teachings that hold people in their awakening, which usually diet, responsibility practices, lineage teachings that kind of hold you responsible and accountable, were eviscerated in the West far more. And so I find that people can get much more distorted in the Western magical tradition because they don't have that grounding of like, this is what to eat. And if you get too egoic, like you're going to go fucking sweep the floor, like we've lost that a little bit. And so the ability to distort becomes far more amplified. And I carry both, right? Like I carry both, like, let's take LSD at Burning Man and like, have like a fucking ecstatic foursome all the way directly to God, and who gives a shit about the past, right? Like that is in me. And there is a deep reverence for a level of work and devotion and tradition that shapes the spiritual awakening with a level of intelligence and self-responsibility that I think is very, very important.
Yeah, and almost an a priori commitment to service, right? I mean, that feels like it's missing in our contemporary moment because it's all about me, my trauma, my growth, my awakening, and that, and even just watching like 5-MeO, Toad, like make its rounds in the last 10 years from Silicon Valley up and down the coast. And I just keep looking. I'm like, okay, well, who's liquidating all their stocks and giving it away to charity and, becoming a saint with a begging bowl?
Totally.
No one.
And if all spirituality is predicated on capitalism as well, and your spiritual teachers are all reliant on you to buy shit or pay their rent or whatever, like who's going to tell you the truth? And the truth is the core of all real spirituality. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, that is actually the point of and the whole book, Recapture the Rapture, right? It starts with, hey, we're in a tight spot. You know, like we are at a point in history where we can legitimately contemplate the either unraveling of our own civilization or potentially the conclusion of our species for one of the first times ever in human history.
Yeah.
And that's a big load and a big responsibility, but also, holy shit, look at the paradox. We have access to all of these techniques in an unprecedented way.
Yeah.
We have access to all of these traditions in an unprecedented way. And these are the very things that are catalyzing so many of us to have these breakthrough waking up kinds of experiences. And what do we wake up into? Oh my gosh, I'm a golden god, right? I'm on drugs, right? Maybe like some version of that. And holy shit, the very same techno-industrial, hyper advanced civilization that allowed this very thing to take place for me is possibly also responsible for mine and everyone else's demise super soon.
Yeah.
Like that's a mind fuck. And so how can we share these tools, right? Of, the sexual yoga of becoming, hedonic engineering, whatever, label we could loosely put on it, such that we can offer that profound, ineffable, initiatory experience into our true nature and life, the universe, and everything in a way that remains non-denominational and non-specific, so that everyone in every culture and around the world can have their own unique experience of the mystery. And then fundamentally start with grassroots realization and activation. So what is the blockchain, right, of consciousness and culture?
Yeah.
Right. Especially because, right, like it used to be that if there was a priest class, they had the keys to the kingdom. So they controlled both who had access to those states and what they meant. Right. And now we can say, hey, we can open source the protocol for an initiatory death rebirth practice. And as you know well, right, the French term for orgasm, la petite mort, the little death, right, like all the shamanic traditions, it actually is remarkably straightforward. It is a deep reset at the level of the brainstem. It is a heightening in vagal nerve tone, boosting of endocannabinoid coherence in our entire system, and the vagal nerve, and a drop into delta wave EEG. So the lowest frequency of neuroelectric activity, which is as close to brain dead. Basically, it's a DIY near-death experience.
So what you're saying is it's time to have an orgasm.
Well, as one element in a recipe, like basically cultivates sensation, and it could be a theragun, it could be percussive massage, it could be electricity, it could be magnetism, it could be pain, it could be orgasm, it could be all of them. Yeah. Right? And load up a human nervous system and then pulse that through in order to knock out all the circuits in a climactic sensory experience, aka orgasm by any other name, but this would be a super orgasmic state, reside in the post-coital erotocomatose lucidity, right, of that sense of like, I am awake, I am clear, but I'm damn near brain dead, right? And from that deep reset, power back up into my life, my health, my sense of balance, my sense of awareness. And the weirdest thing of all, and I have no idea why this is true, is that neurophysiological reset, which is mappable and trackable. And there's like Carl Deiseroth at Stanford is doing phenomenal research on this with ketamine and out-of-body experiences, its antidepressive effects, but also its delta wave correlate and electrical stimulation of the delta wave correlate produces the same out-of-body experiences minus the ketamine and the orgasmic, post-orgasmic state. And Nicole Prause's work, she's like, actually, I think the real juice is in the peri-orgasmic state. It's in the edging up to. Yep. She's like, that's where the money is neurochemically.
That's the space I use.
Right? And you're like, oh, okay. So for reasons we don't yet know, that neurophysiological recipe also produces the most balls out interior subjective imaginal experiences possible, including some sense of like, oh my gosh, we've just hacked the secrets to the universe and are gazing at the magic, the magic 8-ball.
Yeah. And perhaps if you use that imaginal ability that is heightened in that edging state before you go over into climax right ahead of time to visualize and manifest what you most wanted, you would be able to align the deep parts of your nervous system in a higher vibration to the reality that you wish to exist in.
Just perhaps, right? You're editorializing again, but yes. But that, see, to me, that's where I have an ethical, philosophical issue with the law of attraction and The Secret and Lucky Girl TikTok and all of those things, because they are basically playing with psychotechnologies that actually do work, but doing it without any lineage insistence on the clarification or purification of ego before throwing those switches, so that there's a fucking chasm between I want what my waking state, grasping, seeking ego mind wants, and I'm going to hack it with sexy time magic, versus may all sentient beings be free from suffering. May I be aligned humbly with love. Right. And to me, in some respects, that's a distinction between white magic and black magic.
Yes.
Right?
Well, you can practice sex magic with an alignment to a North Star of may this manifest in the highest good of all beings truly, and meditation practices to feel the depth of the alignment. I also feel that manifestation practices are good for empowering people to realize themselves as co-creators with the universe, because a lot of people have actually forgotten that power, that they have an ability to interface with reality in such a way that they are agents of their own desires, and that there is a powerful remembrance for people in that ability. And I think that's where you get that lineage of like The Secret and, manifestation teachings and things like that. However, what's really missing from it, that I think you're speaking to in the language that I use, is that one of the cool things about this universe is that there are no guarantees. You don't control reality. You aren't able to get everything that you want. And because of that, you are simultaneously working with manifestation and surrender. And the depth of surrender to the will of life is actually inherent in the true spiritual practice of manifestation. Because if you manifest without an alignment towards the inherent surrender of being in embodied reality, you will, as you are saying, increase your level of suffering and pain, because there's no way to guarantee any outcome in this universe. However, if you truly play with universal surrender, that you do not control the outcome of this universe, but you understand that part of what we are invited to do in manifestation practices is to stand for the courage of our heart's desire in a universe that guarantees nothing. You can actually simultaneously increase your ability to surrender to the great power of the universe and your personal power to engage as a sentient, empowered being in the continuously unfolding creation, because life is so much bigger than you, and you are also a part of life, right? And so to me, when sex magic and manifestation are taught as part of that tapestry, you can actually be training people in the art of surrender and manifestation at the same time, which I believe is the only way for them to actually be able to be on a path of manifestation in a way that isn't increasing the chain of egoic bondage and ultimate suffering.
Yeah. What I really liked what you said was, when I stand in the courage of my heart's desire in a universe that guarantees me absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. And right, the potential overage is where you get the Mickey and the Sorcerer's Apprentice factor. Like, I'm going to put on the fucking wizard's hat and I'm going to get it to do my dirty dishes. Yeah. And that road lies ruin also. And it's like the Golem of Prague, that mystical Kabbalistic story, right? Where the rabbi, that there's a pogrom, they're trying to protect the Jews. He tries to breathe life. This is the origins of the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein story, right? He speaks the magic words, right? The tetragrammaton, to bring life into the clay, like Adam and Yahweh. He's not supposed to, but he's doing it anyway, right? And the golem steps up and is ungovernable and actually comes and destroys. And that's used in Czech culture, like by grandmothers, like, go to bed or the golem will get you, right? It's just kind of a folktale. But the esoteric interpretation is, he played God. Yeah. And be careful of what you do, be careful of what you create when you're playing God, because it will become all that you are and not just that which you want. Right? And so, at least for me, right, I never had a Dumbledore or a Gandalf. I looked, just didn't find him. I was like, all right, fuck, I guess we're on our own. had I,
Yeah.
right, I might feel a little more comfortable. I feel this is true with like DMT psychonauts. Like, do you know where you're fucking going? Are you sure you know? Like, do you have a roadmap? Because I think you're just bungee jumping in to the galactic party, and sometimes you're an honor guest, and sometimes you're bum rushing the gate.
Totally.
And I would not roll those. I don't feel comfortable rolling those dice without a trustworthy map and set of coordinates. And so the same thing with any form of remotely egoic seeking. The closest I've ever, like even in magic, right? The closest I ever got was like, I am comfortable maybe drawing a banishing pentagram, because it sure does seem that when we get into the juju, shit happens, right? And sometimes I'll come back into 3D reality and there's like a brick sailing through the air at my head, and it's directly proportional to how much magic we got into, right? In those realms. I'm like, okay, I think I might want to like shields up. I need to learn how to put shields up. But I never felt comfortable drawing an invoking pentagram, because I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I have no idea the purity of my system in a domain that I am a fundamental novice. So the closest we've ever come is like, as far as manifesting at those peak times of release and anything else, is just, may our kids be happy. May there be more fucking love. May things work out, right? For everyone. I've never felt remotely comfortable, and this is my own perhaps lack of sack, I don't know, but like I've never even felt comfortable praying on behalf of myself for anything that might be favorable to me. I'm willing to take a step. I'm willing to ask for, endurance, or the ability to keep going, to do the thing that I know is mine. But I haven't felt comfortable ever asking for end runs or shortcuts or a thumb on the scales.
I think I've always trusted the cosmic unfurling wisdom of life, such that I can cast my vote for my personal desire, which exists whether I articulate it clearly or not. And part of manifestation to me is just articulating clearly what's already latent inside of me. It's not like I'm even doing anything out of the ordinary. I'm just making it more known and trusting that the deep wisdom of life can either listen to its little rivulet, right, in the infinite ocean, or not. And so the humility of that, with a deep intentional, may this manifest in the highest good of all beings, or I don't want it, gives me trust in the art of manifestation, that I'm not just walking around being flippant with the universe, because that's not my style. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with it. You're like, whatever, I started sacred sexuality and ended up like a fucking addicted black magician. Like, who knows, right? And like, it's not like there's something
It's
like
happened
wrong.
before. It has happened before.
Aleister Crowley, yo. But like,
hell, the track record is abysmal.
the track record's abysmal. And I do think that there are very intelligent ways in which those deepest shadowy elements can be avoided. And that to me is what lineage and tradition is all about. And honestly, my friends, I gotta say, who feel the most lost to me on the spiritual path, who have the most issues, who have the most health issues, the most whatever issues, like personal issues with spirituality, they never had a true teacher. They never apprenticed themselves to anyone or any tradition, And I don't, like, literally, like, true talk, like, I have gotten to a level of influence in who I am as a tantrika, and I still apprentice myself to at least 3 people that I consider at a level of mastery every single fucking week. And like that, to me, it's no guarantee that I stay in integrity, but it sure does help, right? And I do that on top of apprenticing myself with teachers in schools for years, 5 years at a time, 4 years at a time, right? I wanted to do 12 years, but the teacher I wanted to do 12 years with turned out to be a psychotic cult leader, as you get sometimes, but like the willingness was there to dedicate. And I think that the dedication over time and the willingness to humble yourself is very important, and it gets lost in all the like guru thing, right? Like now we're like, oh, gurus and like that, guru trip and like, being a bad teacher, like surely like that obviously exists, and the manipulation of that and the disempowerment of people. But we're also not talking about the art of engaging in tradition and the power of humbling yourself, right? When my friends have come to me and been like, I'm a golden god, right? They have like one Kundalini activation. They're like, now I'm everyone's sex coach or whatever. And like, I am living Shakti or whatever. I was like, I just want you to know that like in my tradition, when you're in this period, like that's when you like wash the floor with your toothbrush every day, you know, like, or whatever. You sweep the floors for months on end, maybe years, because it grounds you in this level of humility. It's like, how do you take humility and power together? And I would talk to you forever, but I have to fly to Egypt now.
So it goes.
So it goes. Jamie, it's been truly wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's so beautiful to be able to talk and feel and engage at this level with someone who has such a unique and beautiful and thoughtful approach. And I can hear in all of the guarding and caution that you are expressing a deep love for humanity and wanting them to be safe. And there's a real beauty in that. And so thank you for being so deep in the journeying of all of this and the exploration of all of this with such a mind that it unfolds in the highest good of all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we were just on the cusp of a very interesting conversation about teacherly authority, but we'll have to
Next time.
put a pin in it.
Hopefully we'll have you back.
Yeah, because I think it's like Voltron meets Fellowship of the Ring. There's actually a way to do it.
Yeah.
Which I don't think we've actually conducted yet. I feel like we're all here on the edges, but it is that idea, like the ring absolutely corrupts.
Yeah.
And the mistake is to think that any one of us can pick it up.
Yeah.
The fellowship can hold it.
Yeah.
And then what is the slice of divinity that each of us holds that when we activate it can power up into a deity? Because like we've kind of put on the shelf devotion, awe, honoring, subservience, right? Because it's too problematic when one of us grabs the ring and says, I'm the one.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh no, actually, if we can honor the, almost like what would you eulogize each other for?
Yeah.
Right? And be like, that is the slice of the divine manifest in that person. And we all have a piece, right? And when we combine them, who is that?
Yeah.
Anthropos.
Totally.
And we worship her, him in the sacred androgyne. And right. And but it only exists as we all connect the circuit.
Yeah.
And so it gives us, it brings awe and deference and service back online.
Yeah.
Without it being, what's the word? Capturable. You know, and we can keep each other in check as well.
Totally.
And then ultimately, like the notion that also that ring is like the golden shadow, taking on the golden shadow of an audience.
Yeah.
Right. Is corrupting, but it's also a feature, not a bug of tribal primate dynamics. So to me, the most potent way we could do this going forward is you create the ritual priests and priestesses, but you wear it like a role.
Yeah.
It might even be with a mask, right? And you rotate men and women. So men and women are up there in a dyad.
Yeah.
So you're representing it. And then when they come off, to your point about cleaning floors with toothbrushes, you're like, thank you so much. High fives. You rocked it this Sunday. Now, Geiger counter, you got way the fuck too much golden shadow on you. Going back and peel potatoes.
Yeah.
Right. You're not that special. Take a rotation. And then we all realize that the role of Hierophant, of minister of the sacred, is a role.
Yep.
It's not fused with our ego identities. And we treat it as literally exposure to radiation.
Yeah.
It's a necessary service.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not a position to claim.
Right. Or like, I do what I do at the behest of the truth of life every single day. And if I hold on to it 1 second longer, that's egoic.
Yeah.
And if I seize it and own it every single day that it's true, like Adya Shanti, one of my favorite meditation teachers, says, like, fish swim
He's clean.
and I teach. You know, it's like, it's just true. And for some of us, it's just true to teach. You know, like you're not doing it because you want some sort of like egoic platform for everyone to pay attention to you. It's not like I have zero shadow. Of course, I would never claim that. But there is a space of teaching because it's the most true thing in the universe that your being could do at any moment.
Yeah.
You know, and to know the difference between egoic gratification to feed the hungry ghost of your ancient wounding and being in true alignment. And that being in a human body means that it'll always be some mix, You know, it's not like there's the deepest of deepest purities, but I also want to, be a stand for people who are teachers because it's true. And that the way to hold that in my experience is that the moment it stops being true, then I let it go.
Yeah. Don't speak when spoken to, speak when spoken through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The practice I want to offer you is a lefty practice. And my experience in the left-handed tradition comes from many teachers and mentors that I have worked with. And this specific practice I learned from this amazing mentor, Ernest Morrow. And I worked with him for about 2.5 years. And the core experience of it for me was shifting from the right-handed path, which is totally legit. And you can be in the right-handed path. And I still exist in the right-handed path sometimes, which is I'm doing this because I'm going to get something. And I think I know what I'm going to get. So I'm going to do this job because it's going to make me happy. I'm going to get married because I'm going to be in love for the rest of my life. I'm going to have this baby because it's going to bring me fulfillment, right? I'm going to go to this party because I'm going to have a great time. Now, there's a power to our intentions, right? I intend to be in love forever when I get married. I intend to feel fulfillment with this baby. I intend to have a great time at this party. And if we're being really honest with ourselves, number one, we never know what we're going to get. Not really. Anyone who's ever had a baby, and I haven't yet, knows that a baby's like an ayahuasca ceremony. It's a portal, and you don't know what you're going to get on the other side. Getting married is a portal. Sure, you might feel in love for the rest of your life, but you also might be in divorce court in 2 years. Like, you don't know for sure. And even the best, deepest, most pristine intentions do not control reality. We never know what we're going to get. You might go to the party and have the time of your life. You might have the worst night of your life. It might just be boring as shit. You actually don't know. And that's what makes life so magical. It's the mystery. It's a practice. It's a giant ceremony. Dressed up like a party in some cases, or for many of us, a nightmare, right? And the thing about a ceremony is anything can happen. So a right-handed path says, I'm going to do this practice because I'm going to become more spiritual. A right-handed path says, I'm going to marry this person because they're going to make me happy. A right-handed path says, I'm going to take this job because it's going to bring me accolades and I'll feel worthy. And that might come to pass, right? Sometimes you're right. But a lot of the time, you're wrong. And one of the fundamental misunderstandings of that is, number one, this is already as divine as it gets. This is all God. So you actually can't really get more spiritual. And you're already inherently worthy. So you can't really get more worthy. You're like as worthy as it gets. So doing things to get something that already is true is like one of the ways that the ego plays a really extended game of delusion with us. And there can be realness in it, if that makes sense. So like I worked really hard at my trauma because I wanted to get better. I didn't want to live my life full of trauma. And thank God I had a vision of myself getting better. I had a vision of myself getting more spiritual. That drove me to do 10 years of spiritual practice in Asia because I wanted heaven. I worked super hard at my career because I wanted money and I wanted success and I wanted the fulfillment of my dharma. So that doesn't mean that believing that things will get you something, A, can't be true sometimes, and B, doesn't have real world positive effects, right? It can drive you. And at a certain point, if you really want it, the left-handed path, the jump to being a lefty, is to say, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to get. I'm going to roll the fucking dice and I'm going to do it just because. And in fact, and this is what Ernest really showed me in the mentorship, was I'm going to do it to be me. I'm going to do it to express the unique beauty of me. What does it feel like to go to a party to express the unique beauty of you? rather than to necessarily have a good time or a horrible time, what would it look like to let your beauty unfold, the you unfold through a horrible night or through an amazing night or through a boring night? What if you took on a job because it felt true, not knowing what you were going to get, and that you knew you'd get a chance to express yourself, whether you had a nightmare of a boss or a glorious boss, or a dream job or a hellscape, whatever, right? What if you got married and you knew that you were going to feel yourself with your beloved? Maybe in the happiest experiences ever, maybe you just married Satan in a Sunday hat and you're going to get to know you through that. So this lefty shift is, I can break down delusion, but I'm not going to get more spiritual. And I'm always going to be me, right? This fundamental existence, this fundamental beingness. And so what do I think I can get from reality anyways? And to me, this lefty path is a path of devotion. I'm just here to love the goddess in all experience. So I do things to be in devotion. I do things to fall in love with all of reality. I do things to be myself because Goddess created this whole experience and I get to be me in it, whatever that looks like. So what falls away on the left-handed path then is I have to do it this way because this is more spiritual or this is right or this is going to get me what I want, into I did it because it was true. And people look at the lefties and they're like, oh, they drink alcohol and party and do the crazy rituals and stuff like that. Sometimes they do. But the hallmark of a true lefty is devotion to truth. So that means I don't care what religion said to me. I don't care what the media said to me. Sometimes religion is true. Sometimes the media is true, right? I don't care what my childhood conditioned me to do. Sometimes that conditioning is helpful. Sometimes it's not. I'm listening to what's true. So if taking a drug is true, I'll do it. If having a wild sex ritual is true, I'll do it. If hanging out in a graveyard is true, I'll do it, right? I don't have this idea that it's right or wrong. And likewise, if being sober is true, well, I do that. And if not going to the party is true, I'll do that. If meditating in a pristine temple or church of silence and prayer is true, I'll do that. Because it's about devotion, not about getting something. And to me, that's where the true love lies, right? I'm in love with this creation. I'm not trying to get something from it anymore. I'm in love with it. And I also love the parts of me that still want to get something. I still love the parts of myself that still want to heal more trauma and get a better relationship and do all of this and still have attachments. I'm not saying they're gone at all, but those sweet moments when I do it just for the sake of doing it, just for the sake of love, just for the isness of it, the leftiness of that gets me all the way to the core. Thank you so much for being here, for listening to this Tantric Life. Thank you for making it to the end of a podcast. That is an accomplishment. And if you want to learn more, if you want practical tools and guidance in Tantra and sacred sexuality, then head on over to laylamartin.com, sign up with your email address. You're probably like, email, what is this, 1996? Let me tell you, my emails are special. They're also so not safe for work that we send them on Sundays because they are chock full of some of the most licentious education that you are ever going to find. So I share in-depth tantric trainings, practical tools that you can incorporate into your life every single day. I also talk about really embarrassing and shocking moments from my own life as I guinea pig this entire tradition for myself in my own life. And if you want to stay connected, that is the way to stay connected. We also have incredible resources there. So if you want to learn sex magic, breath work, couple sex practices, tantric sexuality on the website, you can get those trainings for free if you head over and check it out, laylamartin.com. Finally, go ahead and follow me on Instagram. Don't miss a single reel. That's at the Layla Martin. You can also follow me on YouTube to make sure you don't miss any of these podcasts. That is Layla Martin. And thank you once again so much for being here. I can't wait to share more with you.